The horse had been dying for the last 10 miles. Elena felt it in the animal's labored breathing, the stumble in its gait that grew more pronounced with each passing hour. She whispered apologies into its sweat-soaked neck, knowing they meant nothing. The mare had carried her this far on stolen oats and desperation, farther than she'd had any right to ask. When the lights finally appeared through the darkness, distant and flickering like dying stars, Elena almost wept. Almost. She'd cried herself empty 3 days ago, somewhere between abandoning her shoes to a river crossing and realizing the men tracking her wouldn't stop until they dragged her back to Chicago in chains. Or worse, married to Marcus Thornhill, her guardian's chosen buyer. Because that's what the arrangement was, stripped of its polite veneer. A transaction. Her inheritance for his political connections. Her future sold before she'd ever had a chance to claim it. The ranch house materialized from the gloom like something out of a fever dream. It wasn't large, a single-story structure of weathered timber and stone, practical rather than pretty. A barn stood nearby, its doors secured against the night. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine. Elena slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling. The mare's head drooped, flanks heaving. Guilt twisted in Elena's chest, sharper than hunger. The animal had given everything. She took 3 steps toward the house before her vision swam. The ground tilted. She caught herself against a fence post, splinters biting into her palm. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had become fluid, measured only in distance covered and dangers evaded. The porch steps seemed impossibly steep. She climbed them anyway, one hand pressed to the rough wood siding for balance. Up close, she could see the house was well maintained despite its age. No broken windows, the door solid and true in its frame. Someone cared about this place. She raised her fist to knock. The door opened before her knuckles touched wood. The man who stood there wasn't old, but he carried age in his eyes, the kind that came from seeing too much and forgetting how to look away. 30, maybe 35. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin, stubble darkening his jaw. Dark hair fell past his collar, as though he'd given up on scissors months ago. But it was his eyes that stopped her, gray as winter storm clouds, and just as merciless. He took in her appearance with a single sweeping glance, the torn and muddied dress that had once been fine silk, her bare feet bleeding from rocks and thorns, the wild tangle of her hair that had lost its pins somewhere in Nebraska. She watched his expression for pity, for shock, for any emotion at all. She found none. "You lost?" His voice matched his face, rough, direct, expecting nothing. Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "I need help." "That mare yours?" Elena glanced back at the horse, still standing where she'd left it, head down. "She was stolen. I stole her. From the men chasing me." Something flickered in his eyes. Not judgment, calculation. "They close?" "I don't know. Maybe a day behind, maybe less." He studied her for a long moment, and Elena felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her ruined clothes, like he was reading a ledger, tallying up assets and liabilities, determining her worth. "Can't help you," he said finally. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena's hand shot out, catching the doorframe as he started to close it. "Please." "I don't do charity, miss. This isn't a church or a way station. You want sanctuary? Try Redemption Creek, 12 miles north." "I can work." The words tumbled out desperate. "I can cook clean. Got no use for a cook. I manage fine." "Then anything, whatever you need. I'll do anything." His eyes narrowed. Anything's a dangerous word. Elena met his gaze, pulling together the last shreds of her dignity. "I'm being hunted by men who want to drag me back to Chicago and force me into a marriage with a man twice my age. They've killed to protect their investment before. I have nowhere else to run, so yes, anything that doesn't involve going back." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind moving through the prairie grass and the labored breathing of the dying horse. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena. Elena Cross." "That's your real name?" She hesitated. "Does it matter?" "Suppose not." He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm Rhett Callahan. This is my land, 300 acres of it, plus grazing rights on another 1,000. I run cattle, 60 head at present, planning to expand come spring. Elena waited, not understanding where this was going. I work alone, he continued. Have for 4 years now, since my partner died. It's a hard life, brutal in winter. Most days I'm up before dawn and don't quit until after dark. The work never stops, the pay is whatever the market bears, and there's no guarantees of anything except that you'll be tired, dirty, and sore most of the time. I don't mind hard work. I wasn't finished. His voice carried an edge now. I don't need a cook or a cleaning woman. I don't need companionship or conversation. What I need is a partner, someone with skin in the game, someone who won't run when things get difficult, and they will get difficult. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't understand. I'm saying I'll offer you protection, shelter, and a share in the profits. In exchange, you work this land same as me. But there's a condition. What condition? We get married. The words seemed to echo in the space between them, impossible and stark. Elena stared at him, searching for the joke, the cruelty, any explanation that made sense. You're insane. Maybe. He didn't look insulted. But I'm also practical. You need legal protection. A married woman has rights a runaway doesn't. Your guardian can't force you into a marriage if you're already somebody's wife. As for me, I need help I can count on. Hired hands drift, partners stay. You don't even know me. I know you stole a horse and rode it to death rather than go back. I know you're standing on my porch ready to collapse, and you still haven't asked for water or a place to sit. That tells me something about your spine. He paused. I also know you've got about 30 seconds before you pass out, so if you're going to answer, do it now. The world tilted again. Elena locked her knees, refusing to fall. Her mind raced through options she didn't have, alternatives that didn't exist. This man was offering her a lifeline, however strange its shape, or he was offering her a different kind of prison. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? For the first time, something almost human crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but a recognition of shared understanding. Because this land will break me if I keep working it alone, because I'm tired of talking to cattle, and because... He hesitated, choosing words carefully. Because sometimes the only thing crazier than a desperate gamble is playing it safe when you've got nothing left to lose. Elena looked past him into the house. Warm lamplight, solid walls, the promise of safety, however temporary. Then she turned back toward the darkness, toward the endless prairie that hid men who wanted to own her. No romance, she said, her voice steadier now. No expectations. Beyond the work. Agreed. And if I want to leave, your choice. Always. But if you leave, the protection leaves with you. I won't lie to lawmen or stand against hired guns for someone who's already gone. Fair. Brutal, but fair. Elena drew a breath that hurt her ribs. She thought of her parents, dead 6 years now, of the trust fund her guardian controlled until her 25th birthday or marriage, of the life she'd imagined versus the one she'd been running from for 2 weeks straight. She thought of Marcus Thornhill's cold smile and the way he'd looked at her like livestock. Yes, she said. Rhett nodded once, as if she'd simply agreed to fetch water rather than bind her life to his. There's a preacher in Redemption Creek. We'll ride there tomorrow, get it done legal. Tonight you can sleep in the spare room. There's a basin and pitcher, water's cold but clean. I'll see to your horse. She's dying. I know. I'll make it quick and painless, more mercy than she'd get from the cold. Elena wanted to protest, to beg him to try to save the mare, but she knew better. The horse had carried her to freedom and paid the price. At least this way the end would be kind. Thank you, she managed. Rhett stepped aside, gesturing her into the house. Save your thanks until you've survived a week. Then we'll see if you still mean it. The interior was spare, but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a few battered books. 2 doors led off the main room, both closed. Everything was organized with almost military precision, every tool in its place, nothing wasted. That one's yours. Rhett pointed to the right door. Mine's the other, Kitchen's adequate. Coffee, beans, some salt pork. Help yourself to whatever you need. Elena crossed to the door he'd indicated, her hand on the latch. She turned back. What was your partner's name, the one who died? Rhett had moved to a cabinet, pulling down a tin cup. He paused at the question, his back to her. James Bridger. Why? Just wondered if you'd tell me. I don't lie, he said flatly. Can't afford to out here. Lies get people killed. He poured water into the cup from a pitcher. You should remember that too. I will. Elena opened the door to her room, a small space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window looking out onto darkness. Simple. Honest. Nothing like the gilded cage she'd left behind. She heard Rhett moving in the main room, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of him walking toward the barn, toward the horse that had saved her life. A single shot cracked through the night, sharp and final. Elena closed her eyes, leaning against the doorframe. The mare was free now. She hoped she'd made the right choice for herself. Sleep came hard and left early. Elena woke to the sound of someone moving in the main room, the clank of a metal pot, the scrape of a chair. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the thin curtain covering her window. She'd slept in her ruined dress, having nothing else. Now she peeled it off, examining the damage properly for the first time. The silk was beyond saving, torn at the shoulder and hem, stained with mud and what might have been blood. She wasn't sure if it was hers or from pushing through brambles. The basin Rhett had mentioned sat on top of the chest of drawers, filled with cold water. Elena washed as best she could, scrubbing away 2 weeks of flight and fear. The water in the basin turned gray. She found a comb on the shelf, sturdy, practical, like everything else in this place, and worked through the tangles in her hair until her scalp ached. There was a knock at the door. I'm awake, she called. Got some things for you. Rhett's voice, muffled by the wood, leaving them outside the door. She waited until his footsteps retreated, then opened the door a crack. A pile of folded clothes sat on the floor, men's clothes, but clean. A shirt that would hang loose on her frame, trousers with a belt, thick socks. At the bottom of the pile, a pair of worn boots. Elena dressed quickly. The clothes were too large, but the belt cinched the trousers to something manageable. The boots were closer to her size. They'd belonged to someone with smaller feet than Rhett. James, maybe. The dead partner. She emerged from the room to find Rhett at the table, eating what looked like fried cornmeal mush from a tin plate. He glanced up, took in her appearance, nodded. Coffee's in the pot. Mush is in the pan if you want it. Elena poured coffee into a cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The brew was strong enough to strip paint, bitter and black. She'd never tasted anything better. We'll ride to Redemption Creek this morning, Rhett said, mopping up the last of his breakfast with a piece of hard bread. Get the legal part done. Then we come back, and I show you what needs doing around here. How far is the town? 3 hours, give or take. We'll be back by early afternoon. He stood, carrying his plate to a basin near the window. You ride? Elena thought of the fancy side saddles and carefully groomed paths of Chicago's parks. I can stay on a horse. That'll do. I'll saddle 2 mounts. You should eat something. It's a cold ride. She forced down some of the cornmeal mush, which was exactly as appetizing as it looked but filled the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. By the time she finished, Rhett had returned from the barn leading 2 horses, a large bay gelding and a smaller paint mare. This is Smoke, he said, gesturing to the gelding. And that's Juniper. She's got a gentle mouth but doesn't like spurs. You won't need them anyway. Elena approached Juniper carefully, letting the mare sniff her hand before touching her neck. The horse's coat was clean and well-brushed, her eyes clear. Whatever else Rhett Callahan was, he took care of his animals. Need help mounting? Rhett asked. No. Elena grabbed the saddle horn and pulled herself up, settling into the seat with only minor awkwardness. The stirrups were slightly long, but she could manage. Rhett swung onto Smoke with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. He turned the gelding toward the northeast, and Juniper followed without prompting. They rode in silence through the gray morning light. The land stretched out in all directions, rolling prairie broken by occasional stands of cottonwood and pine. In the distance, Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. The wind carried the scent of sage and cold earth. Elena had never seen so much emptiness. It should have felt isolating, this vast expanse of nothing. Instead, it felt like breathing room, like possibility. "Your guardian," Rhett said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He have legal claim to you?" "He was appointed by the court when my parents died. I was 17. He controls my inheritance until I'm 25 or married." "How old are you now?" 22. Rhett nodded, processing this. "So marriage ends his authority." "Legally, yes. But Marcus, the man he wants me to marry, has connections. Judges, police, politicians. They won't care about legality if he wants me back badly enough. Then we make sure the marriage is ironclad. Public record, witnesses, the whole ceremony. No room for anyone to claim it's invalid." "You've thought about this." "I think about everything." He adjusted his seat in the saddle. "Out here, planning ahead is the difference between surviving and dying. You learn that fast or you don't last long." They rode on. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Elena felt her body relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, the tension of the past week slowly bleeding out of her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Why didn't you marry before now, if you needed a partner so badly?" Rhett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "I was engaged once, 6 years ago. She visited the ranch, spent a week here, decided she couldn't stomach the isolation, went back to St. Louis and married a banker." He paused. "After that, I figured I was better off alone. Turns out I was wrong about the alone part, but right about not trusting promises that aren't backed by necessity." "What makes you think I won't run like she did?" "Because you've got nowhere to run to. And because you're not here looking for romance or adventure, you're here looking for survival. That's honest. I can work with honest." It was a harsh assessment, but Elena couldn't argue with it. She was here because every other option had closed. If there had been a different door, a safer path, she would have taken it. But maybe that made this stronger, not weaker. No illusions, no expectations beyond the work and the partnership. They crested a rise, and Redemption Creek appeared in the valley below, a small collection of wooden buildings clustered along a creek that glinted silver in the morning light. A church steeple rose above the other structures, white paint bright against the gray-brown landscape. "That's it?" Elena asked. "That's it. Population maybe 200 counting the outlying ranches. General store, blacksmith, saloon, church, and a whole lot of nothing else." They rode down into the town, drawing a few curious glances from early risers. Rhett guided them directly to the church, a modest building with a small house attached to its side. "Wait here," he said, dismounting. He walked to the house and knocked. The man who answered was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes. He and Rhett spoke briefly on the porch, the preacher's expression shifting from confusion to surprise to something that might have been concern. He glanced toward Elena, then back to Rhett, asking a question Elena couldn't hear. Rhett's response was short. The preacher nodded slowly. "Miss Cross," the preacher called, "would you come inside, please?" Elena dismounted, her legs stiff from the ride. She climbed the steps, suddenly aware of how she must look. A stranger in borrowed men's clothes, about to marry a man she'd met 12 hours ago. "I'm Reverend Thomas Whitfield," the preacher said gently. "Mr. Callahan has explained your situation. Before we proceed, I need to ask you something in private, if you'll permit it." Rhett stepped back. "I'll be in the church." Once he was gone, Reverend Whitfield studied Elena with those kind eyes. "Are you being coerced, Miss Cross? If this man is forcing you—" "He's not," Elena said quickly. "This was his offer, but it's my choice." "You understand what marriage means? The vows, the commitment?" "I understand that it's a legal contract that will protect me from men who mean me harm. I understand that Mr. Callahan is offering me partnership in exchange for work, and I understand that—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That sometimes unconventional solutions are the only honest ones." The Reverend sighed. "You're very young. I'm old enough to know when I'm out of options. Will you at least tell me your story, your real story, not what you think I want to hear?" So Elena did. She told him about her parents' death, about the guardian who'd seen her inheritance as leverage, about Marcus Thornhill and the wedding she'd run from, about 2 weeks of fear and flight culminating in a dying horse and a desperate knock on a stranger's door. When she finished, Reverend Whitfield was quiet for a long time. "I should refuse," he said finally. "Tell you both to wait, to court properly, to build a foundation of trust and affection." "But you won't." "No, because I've seen what happens to women with nowhere to go in this territory, and because Rhett Callahan is a hard man, but he's honest. If he's given you his word, he'll keep it." The Reverend stood. "Come, let's make this legal before I change my mind." The ceremony was brief and businesslike. No flowers, no music, no guests beyond the Reverend's wife, who served as witness. Elena stood beside Rhett in the small church, sunlight streaming through plain glass windows, and repeated words that felt both surreal and strangely solid. "Do you, Elena Cross, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She looked at Rhett. He met her gaze steadily, no emotion visible in those gray eyes, just certainty. "I do." "Do you, Rhett Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss. Rhett had warned the Reverend beforehand. This was a legal arrangement, not a romantic one. They signed the certificate, the Reverend's wife added her signature as witness, and it was done. Elena Cross became Elena Callahan in less time than it took to cook breakfast. Outside, Rhett paid the Reverend in cash and thanked him curtly. As they mounted their horses, Reverend Whitfield called out, "Mrs. Callahan?" Elena turned. "I'll pray that you find more than you bargained for," he said. "Both of you." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride out. Elena felt the weight of the certificate in her pocket, proof of her new identity, her new life. She was married, legally protected, bound to a stranger who'd promised her nothing but hard work and honesty. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on in years. They were halfway home when Rhett spoke. "When we get back, I'll show you how things work. The cattle, the chickens, the garden plot, where everything is, how I keep the accounts. You need to know all of it." "Why?" "Because if something happens to me, you need to be able to keep this place running. That's what partnership means." Elena absorbed this. He was already planning for contingencies, for scenarios where she'd be alone, not out of pessimism, but practicality. "What if something happens to me?" she asked. "Then I keep going, but I'll make sure you're buried proper, and I'll remember you tried." It was a stark answer, but Elena found she preferred it to empty platitudes. They were building something based on truth, not comfort. When the ranch came into view, Elena felt something unexpected, a sense of coming home. Not to the place, she barely knew it, but to the possibility of it, to the idea that this could be hers, if she was willing to fight for it. They dismounted in the yard. Rhett immediately began unsaddling the horses, his movements efficient and practiced. Elena followed his lead, fumbling slightly with the buckles but managing. "First lesson," Rhett said as he carried his saddle toward the barn. "Animals come first, always. You can be exhausted, hungry, ready to drop. Doesn't matter. Horses get brushed and fed before you sit down. Cattle get checked before you sleep. They depend on us. That's the contract." "Understood." They worked in silence, brushing down the horses and settling them in their stalls with hay and water. The barn was as organized as the house. Tools hung on specific pegs, feed stored in sealed containers to keep out vermin, everything labeled and sorted. "You keep good records," Elena observed. "Have to. One mistake with the feed, with the breeding schedule, with the water supply, and you can lose everything." He hung the last of the tack. "I'll show you the ledger tonight. How I track expenses, profits, what we owe and what's owed to us. You'll need to know how to read it." They spent the rest of the day on what Rhett called the tour. Elena learned where the chicken coop was hidden behind the barn, how to collect eggs without getting pecked. She learned that the vegetable garden, now dormant for winter, would need to be expanded come spring. She learned which fence posts needed replacing and where the good grazing land was, versus the rocky stretches where cattle could break legs. She learned that Rhett hadn't been exaggerating about the workload. There was always something that needed doing, fixing, checking. The ranch was a living thing that demanded constant attention. By evening, Elena's body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. But there was satisfaction in it too, the tiredness that came from productive labor rather than pointless running. They ate dinner in silence, more cornmeal mush with salt pork, coffee so strong it could wake the dead. Elena was beginning to understand that Rhett's cooking philosophy was purely functional, calories in, energy out, nothing wasted on flavor or presentation. After dinner, he pulled out the ledger as promised. It was a thick book with columns of neat handwriting, every cent accounted for. "This is what we made last year," he said, pointing to a figure, "and this is what we spent. The difference is what we had to live on and save for expansion." The profit margin was thin, frighteningly thin. "One bad season?" Elena asked. "Would finish us," Rhett confirmed. "That's why I'm careful, why I can't afford waste or foolishness. This ranch survives on discipline." He walked her through the numbers, feed costs, equipment repairs, the going rate for cattle at market. He showed her where he kept the deed to the land, the contracts with suppliers, the grazing rights agreements. "You need to know where everything is," he repeated, "just in case." They worked until the lamplight grew too dim for reading. Rhett stood, stretching muscles gone stiff from sitting. "That's enough for today. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start early. The cattle won't wait." Elena started toward her room, then paused. "Rhett? Yeah? Thank you for this, for taking a chance." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first week. Then we'll talk." But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that they were in this together now, for better or worse. Elena fell asleep that night to the sound of wind moving across the prairie, the creak of old timbers settling, the distant lowing of cattle. Foreign sounds that would become familiar. A strange life that might become home. If she could prove strong enough to claim it. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of work and exhaustion. Rhett hadn't exaggerated about the early starts. He woke her before dawn each morning, and they worked until dark. Elena learned to feed chickens without scattering grain everywhere, to mend fence with wire and determination, to recognize which cattle were thriving and which needed extra attention. She learned that Rhett spoke more to his animals than he did to her, but his instructions to Elena were always clear and patient. When she made mistakes, and she made plenty, he corrected them without judgment, just showed her the right way and expected her to remember it the next time. On the fourth day, as they were checking the water supply at the far end of the property, Elena spotted dust on the horizon. "Rhett." He followed her gaze. His expression didn't change, but his posture did, everything about him suddenly alert. "How many?" she asked, her voice tight. "Can't tell yet. Could be travelers. Could be trouble." He turned to her. "Go back to the house. There's a rifle over the fireplace. Load it. Shells are in the drawer to the left. Put it on the table where you can reach it quick, then stay inside." "What are you going to do?" "See what they want?" His eyes met hers. "If they're who I think they are, don't come out unless I call for you. And if shooting starts, you get to the storm cellar behind the kitchen. There's supplies there to last a week if needed." Fear clawed up Elena's throat, but she forced it down. "And if they get past you?" "They won't." The certainty in his voice should have seemed like arrogance. Instead, it felt like a promise. Elena rode Juniper back to the house at a gallop, her heart hammering. Inside, she found the rifle exactly where Rhett said it would be. Her hands shook as she loaded it. She'd never fired a gun in her life, but Rhett had shown her the mechanics just yesterday. "Point. Steady your breathing, squeeze the trigger gently. Pray you don't have to find out if you can actually do it." She placed the rifle on the table and moved to the window, watching the dust cloud grow closer. 3 riders, moving fast. They slowed as they reached the ranch boundary where Rhett waited on Smoke, positioned between them and the house. The lead rider was a large man on a black stallion, his coat fine enough to mark him as city money. The 2 men flanking him had the look of hired muscle, hard faces, weapons visible. Elena couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read the body language. The lead rider gesturing toward the house, Rhett shaking his head. The rider's voice rising, angry now. Rhett didn't move, didn't retreat, just sat his horse like a wall, immovable. The confrontation stretched out, tension visible even at this distance. Then one of the hired men reached for his gun. Elena's hand found the rifle before she'd consciously decided to move. She threw open the door, the weapon raised. "Touch that weapon and I'll shoot," her voice carried across the yard, surprising her with its steadiness. All four men turned to look at her. The lead rider's eyes widened in recognition. "Elena!" Marcus Thornhill's voice dripped with false warmth. "Thank God. We've been searching for you. Your guardian has been worried sick." "Leave!" Elena called back. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Darling, you're clearly not thinking straight. This man has obviously taken advantage." "This man is my husband," Elena interrupted. "Legally married 4 days ago in Redemption Creek, recorded and witnessed. Your arrangement with my guardian is void." Marcus's face darkened. "That marriage is a sham. It'll be annulled within the week." "No," Rhett said, his voice carrying that same absolute certainty. "It won't. You're on my land without permission, making threats to my wife. You've got 10 seconds to leave before I make you leave." "You're one man," one of the hired guns said. "We're 3. Those are bad odds." "For you, maybe." Rhett's hand moved to rest on his own rifle. "I know this land. I know where every rock and rise is. You'd be dead before you got halfway to that house. The question is whether you're stupid enough to try." Silence. Elena kept the rifle steady, even though her arms were starting to ache. She could see Marcus calculating, weighing options. "This isn't over," he said finally. "I have lawyers, I have judges. I'll have this farce of a marriage dissolved, and I'll have Elena back where she belongs." "You're welcome to try," Rhett said, "but you'll do it through the courts, not with guns. Now get off my land." Marcus jerked his horse around, his hired men following. They rode hard toward the horizon, dust marking their retreat. Rhett stayed where he was until they disappeared completely. Only then did he ride back to the house. Elena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking now that the moment had passed. Rhett dismounted and climbed the porch steps, taking the weapon from her gently. "You did good," he said. "I've never fired a gun." He didn't know that. Rhett unloaded the rifle. "Question is, did you mean it? If he'd drawn, would you have pulled that trigger?" Elena thought about it honestly, about Marcus's false smile and her guardian's greed, about the life they'd tried to force her into. "Yes," she said, "I would have." Rhett nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Then you'll survive here. Because that's what it takes sometimes, the willingness to protect what's yours, even when it scares you." He moved past her into the house, returning the rifle to its place. Elena followed, her legs unsteady. "He meant what he said," she told Rhett, "about the lawyers. My guardian has money and connections. They'll come at this through legal channels. Let them. Marriage is marriage. They can't undo it just because they don't like it. You don't know these people. They'll find a way." Rhett turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then we'll fight them. Together. That's what this partnership is, Elena. I didn't marry you just to hand you back at the first sign of trouble." "Why did you marry me?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Really? You could have just hidden me, helped me get farther west. Why this?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Because hiding doesn't solve anything. Because running eventually ends when you hit an ocean or a mountain you can't cross. And because—" he paused. "Because I'm tired of half measures. If we're going to make a stand, it should be a real one, something that means something." It wasn't a romantic declaration, but it was honest, and in that moment, Elena valued honesty more than any pretty words. "Then we fight," she said. "Then we fight," he agreed. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of fire and gold. The land stretched out in all directions, wild and unforgiving and beautiful. Their land. Worth fighting for. Elena had spent 2 weeks running from her past. Now, standing beside this hard, honest man in this harsh, honest place, she decided it was time to stop running and start building something that couldn't be taken away. The real work was just beginning. The first snow came early that year, catching them in the middle of fence repairs 2 miles from the house. One moment the sky was gray and threatening. The next, it was dumping white fury across the prairie in sheets so thick Elena couldn't see 10 feet ahead. "Leave it!" Rhett shouted over the wind, already gathering tools with quick, practiced movements. "We need to get back now." They rode hard through the blizzard, Juniper following Smoke's lead more by instinct than sight. Elena's fingers went numb on the reins, despite her gloves, her face burning from the cold and driven snow. By the time the house appeared through the white curtain, ice had formed in her eyelashes. Inside, Rhett built up the fire while Elena peeled off her frozen outer layers with shaking hands. Her teeth chattered too hard to speak. "Here." Rhett pressed a cup of something hot into her hands. Coffee laced with whiskey, strong enough to make her eyes water. "Drink. All of it." She obeyed, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Rhett moved around the house with purposeful efficiency, checking the window seals, securing the shutters, pulling extra blankets from storage. "Storm like this could last 3 days," he said. "Maybe more. We've got enough firewood inside for a week, food for longer. Barn stock, too. The animals will be fine." "Have you seen worse?" Elena managed through chattering teeth. "Seen a man freeze to death 20 yards from his own front door because he couldn't find it in a whiteout." Rhett's voice was matter-of-fact. "Winter here doesn't forgive mistakes." They spent that evening confined to the house while the storm raged outside. Rhett showed Elena how to make proper bread instead of the quick cornmeal mush they'd been living on. His hands were surprisingly deft as he kneaded dough, explaining the importance of letting it rise, of testing the oven temperature by holding your hand inside and counting. "My mother taught me," he said when Elena commented on his skill. "Said a man who couldn't feed himself properly was a fool waiting to starve." She sounds practical. She was. She and my father ran a farm in Missouri before the war. Smaller than this, but profitable. He shaped the dough into a loaf. "They both died of cholera when I was 19. I sold the farm, came west, figured I'd start fresh somewhere the past didn't follow." It was the most personal thing he'd shared since they'd met. Elena turned it over in her mind, seeing the shape of him more clearly now. A man who'd lost everything once and rebuilt through sheer determination. "Is that how you met James, your partner?" Rhett's hands stilled on the dough for just a moment. "Met him in Cheyenne, both of us looking for land. Decided we'd cover more ground together. Found this place, bought it with our combined savings, and spent 3 years making it work." He placed the loaf in the Dutch oven. Then he took sick. Pneumonia. Lasted 2 weeks before it took him. "I'm sorry." "Me too." Rhett closed the oven, brushing flour from his hands. "But sorry doesn't change what is. You learn that quick out here." The bread baked while they went over the account ledger again, Rhett drilling Elena on numbers until she could recite the feed costs and market prices from memory. He was a patient teacher when it came to practical matters, never mocking her ignorance, just correcting and moving forward. That night, lying in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl, Elena found herself thinking about the casual way Rhett had mentioned death. His parents, his partner, the man frozen in the snow. Out here, mortality wasn't an abstraction or a distant fear. It was a neighbor that lived just outside the door, waiting for any moment of weakness. But there was a strange comfort in that honesty, too. No pretense, no illusions about safety that didn't exist, just the clear-eyed acknowledgement that survival required constant vigilance and the willingness to do what was necessary. She fell asleep thinking that maybe she was finally in a place where the truth was valued more than comfortable lies. The storm lasted 4 days. By the time it finally blew itself out, snow had drifted against the north side of the house high enough to cover the lower windows. Rhett spent the better part of a day digging out paths to the barn and chicken coop while Elena kept the fire going and prepared meals. On the 5th day, a rider appeared on the horizon. Elena spotted him first from the kitchen window where she was washing dishes. Her stomach clenched with familiar fear before she recognized the horse. A chestnut gelding with white stockings that belonged to Reverend Whitfield. "Rhett," she called, "we have a visitor." He came in from the barn, saw the approaching rider, and nodded. "That's the Reverend, probably making rounds, checking that folks survived the storm." But when Whitfield dismounted in the yard, his expression was grave. "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan, I'm glad to see you weathered the snow safely." What's wrong? Rhett asked bluntly. The Reverend pulled a folded paper from his coat. This arrived in Redemption Creek 2 days ago. The sheriff asked me to deliver it, given the circumstances of your marriage. Elena took the paper with numb fingers. It was a legal document, dense with formal language, but the meaning was clear enough. Marcus Thornhill, acting on behalf of her guardian, was filing to have the marriage annulled on grounds of coercion and fraud. They're claiming I forced you, Rhett said, reading over her shoulder. That's ridiculous. Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters if they can make it stick in court. He looked at Whitfield. When's the hearing? 3 weeks. In Cheyenne. The judge is Hiram Lancaster. Something flickered across Rhett's face. Lancaster? That's not good. You know him? Elena asked. Know of him. He's old money, Eastern connections, exactly the kind of judge who'd look at our situation and see impropriety instead of necessity. Rhett handed the paper back to Elena. They chose their venue carefully. Whitfield cleared his throat. There's something else. There's been talk in town, questions about the marriage, about Mrs. Callahan's background, some folks saying maybe she's running from legitimate authority. She's running from being sold like livestock, Rhett said sharply. I believe you, but the court won't care what I believe. They'll care about appearances, about legal technicalities, about which side has better lawyers. The Reverend looked genuinely distressed. I'm sorry. I wish I had better news. After Whitfield left, Elena and Rhett sat at the table in heavy silence. The legal document lay between them like an accusation. Maybe I should just go, Elena said finally. Disappear again. They can't annul a marriage if they can't find me. And spend the rest of your life running? Rhett shook his head. That's not a solution. Besides, if you run now, they'll use it as proof of fraud. They'll say you were never committed to the marriage in the first place. Then what do we do? Rhett stood, pacing to the window. He stared out at the snow-covered prairie for a long moment. We fight. We get our own lawyer. We tell the truth. And we show that judge that this marriage is real and legal and none of his damn business to undo. With what money? Lawyers cost, I know what they cost. His voice was hard. I've got savings. Not much, but enough to hire someone competent. I can't let you spend your savings on my problems. He turned to face her, his gray eyes sharp. They're not just your problems anymore. They're our problems. That's what marriage means, Elena. You don't get to shoulder everything alone just because you're used to it. The words hit harder than she expected. She'd been alone for so long since her parents died, maybe even before that. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand with her instead of over her. Okay, she said quietly. We fight. We fight, he agreed. The next week was a blur of preparation. Rhett rode to Cheyenne and returned with a lawyer named Samuel Brooks, a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for winning difficult cases. He listened to their story without interruption, taking notes in a small leather book. Your case has strengths and weaknesses, Brooks said when they finished. The strength is that the marriage is legally sound, properly conducted, recorded, witnessed. The weakness is perception. A wealthy guardian claiming his ward was coerced by a frontier stranger makes for a compelling narrative. So what do we do? Elena asked. We build a counter-narrative. We show that you're not a helpless victim, but a woman who made a rational choice for legitimate reasons. We demonstrate that Mr. Callahan didn't coerce you. He offered you a business arrangement that you accepted with full understanding of the terms. Brooks tapped his pen against his notebook. And we find witnesses who can speak to your character and the legitimacy of your partnership. They spent the next 2 weeks gathering evidence. Reverend Whitfield agreed to testify about the circumstances of the marriage. The shopkeeper in Redemption Creek provided a statement that he'd sold supplies to both Rhett and Elena, working together as partners. Even the sheriff, initially skeptical, admitted under Brooks's questioning that there was no evidence of coercion or impropriety. But it was the work on the ranch that told the real story. Brooks insisted on photographing Elena at various tasks: mending fence, feeding cattle, chopping wood. In each image she looked capable and determined, nothing like a coerced bride or a delicate city girl playing at frontier life. These will help, Brooks said, examining the photographs. They show you're committed to this life, not trapped in it. Through it all, the ranch work continued. Rhett taught Elena to shoot properly, setting up targets behind the barn and drilling her until she could hit them consistently. His instruction was patient but exacting. Aim low. Novices always shoot high. Breathe out before you squeeze. Don't anticipate the recoil. He stood behind her, adjusting her stance. Good. Again. By the end of the week, Elena could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. The rifle's kick against her shoulder had become familiar, almost comfortable. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked one afternoon. "The court case won't be decided by marksmanship." "Because you need to know how to defend yourself. And because—" Rhett paused, choosing words carefully. "Because partners need to be able to count on each other. If something happens to me, I need to know you can handle threats on your own." It was practical reasoning, typical of Rhett, but Elena heard what he wasn't saying, that he'd already started thinking of them as a permanent unit, that her survival mattered to him beyond the terms of their arrangement. They left for Cheyenne 3 days before the hearing. Brooks had arranged lodging at a modest hotel, insisting that they needed to present themselves as respectable and stable. Elena wore a dress Brooks had purchased for her, simple but well made, the kind a ranch wife might wear to town. Rhett wore his best clothes, which weren't much better than his work clothes, but at least lacked the patina of barn dust and fence wire. The night before the hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. She paced their hotel room, anxiety eating at her composure. They'd done everything they could, prepared every argument, but what if it wasn't enough? What if Judge Lancaster looked at her and saw exactly what Marcus wanted him to see? A foolish girl who needed to be returned to proper authority? A soft knock at the connecting door between their rooms made her jump. "Can't sleep either?" Rhett's voice, muffled by wood. Elena opened the door. He stood there in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong," she admitted. "That's a waste of energy. We've done what we can do, the rest is out of our hands." "How are you so calm?" "I'm not." He leaned against the doorframe. "I'm furious. At them for trying to take away your choice. At a system that values connections over justice. At myself for not being rich enough or connected enough to make this easy." His jaw tightened. "But fury doesn't help. So I set it aside and focus on what I can control." Elena studied his face, seeing the tension he was trying to mask. He wasn't as unaffected as he pretended. He was just better at carrying his fear. "Rhett, if this goes badly, if they succeed in annulling the marriage, you should know that I'm grateful for the chance you gave me, for treating me like a partner instead of property." "It's not going to go badly," he said firmly. "And even if it does, we'll figure out the next move. That's what we do. We adapt and keep going." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple." He met her eyes. "You're my wife, Elena. I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't make promises I won't keep. We're in this together until you decide otherwise." She wanted to ask what would happen if her decision was never to leave, if she wanted this partnership to become something more permanent than a legal convenience. But the question felt too large for the night before they faced her enemies in court. "Get some sleep," Rhett said, stepping back toward his room. "Tomorrow we show them what we're made of." The courtroom was smaller than Elena expected, wood-paneled and austere. Judge Lancaster presided from a raised bench, his expression severe beneath bushy white eyebrows. The gallery was surprisingly full. Word had spread about the case, drawing the curious and the judgmental in equal measure. Marcus Thornhill sat with his lawyer at one table, looking confident and prosperous in an expensive suit. His lawyer was a sharp-faced man named Pemberton, who radiated the kind of aggressive competence that came from winning most of his cases. Elena and Rhett sat with Brooks at the opposite table. Brooks had coached them extensively. Sit straight, make eye contact, don't react to provocations. Present a united front. Pemberton opened with a compelling narrative. He painted Elena as a naive young woman, overwhelmed by grief and her guardian's death, vulnerable to manipulation. He described Rhett as the opportunistic stranger who'd taken advantage of her desperation for his own gain. The marriage was conducted with unseemly haste, Pemberton argued. No courtship, no witnesses beyond the minister, no time for Miss Cross, as she was then, to consider her options rationally. This is precisely the kind of situation the law protects against. A vulnerable woman, a predatory man, and a hasty marriage that serves only his interests. Brooks rose for their defense, his manner calm and methodical. My learned colleague tells a dramatic story, but it bears little resemblance to the facts. Mrs. Callahan was not manipulated. She made a clear-eyed choice between genuine alternatives. Mr. Thornhill would have you believe she had no agency, no capacity for rational decision-making. The evidence will show otherwise. He called Reverend Whitfield first. The minister testified that he'd spoken to Elena privately before the ceremony, that she'd seemed fully aware of her choice and its implications. Did she appear coerced in any way? Brooks asked. No, she appeared determined, perhaps desperate, but not confused or manipulated. And Mr. Callahan's demeanor during the ceremony? Businesslike. He made no romantic claims, no false promises. He was clear about the practical nature of the arrangement. Pemberton's cross-examination tried to paint this as further evidence of the marriage's illegitimacy, but Whitfield held firm. The marriage might have been unconventional, but it was legal and consensual. Next came the shopkeeper, who testified about seeing Elena and Rhett working together in the weeks following the marriage, purchasing supplies jointly, making decisions as partners. Then Brooks called Elena herself to the stand. She took her seat, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom fixed on her. Pemberton looked ready to pounce. Marcus watched with an expression that managed to combine concern and possession in equal measure. Brooks guided her through her story, her parents' death, her guardian's control of her inheritance, the arrangement with Marcus that she'd fled from. Why did you run, Mrs. Callahan? Because the marriage being arranged for me wasn't a choice. It was a transaction. My guardian saw my inheritance as an asset to leverage. Marcus saw me as an acquisition. I would have had no say in my own life. And when you arrived at Mr. Callahan's ranch, he offered me a different kind of transaction, an honest one. Work in exchange for legal protection and partnership. No illusions about romance, no false promises, just clear terms that I could accept or refuse. Why did you accept? Elena looked directly at Judge Lancaster. Because it was the first offer anyone had made me in 6 years that treated me as a person capable of making my own decisions. Mr. Callahan didn't try to control me or protect me from myself. He simply offered me a choice and respected whatever answer I gave. Pemberton's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to trip her up, to paint her as foolish or confused. But Elena had spent weeks working 16-hour days on the ranch, learning to face down frightened cattle and brutal weather. A lawyer's questions didn't frighten her. Isn't it true that you were penniless and desperate when you arrived? Yes. And that you would have agreed to almost anything to escape your pursuers? No. If Mr. Callahan had proposed anything dishonorable, I would have kept running. But you had nowhere to run to. Then I would have found somewhere. I'd already traveled hundreds of miles alone. I wasn't helpless, Mr. Pemberton. I was exercising what little agency I had left. Finally, Brooks called Rhett. He took the stand with the same steady calm he brought to everything, answering questions in his direct, unembellished way. Why did you propose marriage to Mrs. Callahan? Brooks asked. Because I needed a partner and she needed protection. The work on the ranch is too much for one person alone. Hired help drifts, but a partner has stake in the outcome. The marriage made her legally safe from her guardian and gave her reason to stay. Some might say that's a cold basis for marriage. Some might, but it's honest. I didn't lie about my feelings or make promises I couldn't keep. I offered her a fair deal, work and partnership in exchange for legal protection and profit share. She accepted those terms with full knowledge. Do you consider the marriage legitimate? Absolutely. We made vows, signed legal documents, and we've honored the terms of our agreement. That's more than many so-called proper marriages can claim. Pemberton's cross-examination tried to paint Rhett as calculating and mercenary, but he couldn't shake Rhett's essential truthfulness. Yes, the marriage was unconventional. Yes, it was based on practical needs rather than romance, but it was legal, consensual, and being honored by both parties. Then Pemberton played his final card. He called Marcus Thornhill to the stand. Marcus presented beautifully, concerned, caring, the worried almost husband who only wanted Elena's well-being. He spoke of her parents' wishes, of the trust her guardian had placed in him, of his genuine affection for Elena. "I wanted to give her time to grieve properly," he said, his voice full of manufactured emotion, "to heal from her loss. But she ran before we could have that conversation. I've been searching for her ever since, worried for her safety." "And if this marriage is upheld," Pemberton asked, "then I'll respect her choice, however much it pains me. But I have to wonder if it truly is her choice, or if she's simply exchanged one form of control for another." It was a masterful performance. Elena saw several people in the gallery nodding sympathetically. Brooks's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Thornhill, you say you cared for Elena deeply. Did you ever ask her directly if she wished to marry you?" Marcus hesitated. "We had an understanding." "That's not what I asked. Did you ever propose marriage and receive her acceptance?" "Her guardian and I had agreed, so no, you never asked Elena herself. You simply assumed her consent." Brooks let that hang in the air. "And when she fled rather than go through with this arrangement, what did you do?" "I searched for her, as I said. You sent armed men after her, men who tracked her for hundreds of miles. That doesn't sound like concern, Mr. Thornhill. That sounds like pursuit of property." "I was worried for her safety." "So worried that you came armed to Mr. Callahan's ranch and had to be ordered off the property at gunpoint?" Brooks's voice sharpened. "That's not the behavior of a concerned suitor, sir. That's the behavior of a man who believes he owns something and is angry it's been taken." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Lancaster banged his gavel for order. Pemberton tried to recover on redirect, but the damage was done. Marcus's carefully constructed image had cracked, revealing the possessiveness underneath. Both sides rested. Judge Lancaster called for a recess before rendering his decision. Elena and Rhett waited in a small room off the main court. Brooks paced, reviewing his notes, muttering to himself about points he should have emphasized more strongly. "Stop," Rhett said. "You did well. We all did. Now we wait." "I hate waiting," Elena said. "Me too." Rhett looked at her, his expression softer than usual. "But whatever happens, you're not going back to them. If this judge rules against us, we'll find another way." "What other way?" "I don't know yet, but there's always another move. You just have to be willing to make it." The bailiff appeared in the doorway. "Judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom, every eye following them. Judge Lancaster looked even more severe than before, his expression unreadable. "I've considered the arguments presented by both sides," he began, his voice carrying across the silent room. "This case raises important questions about the nature of consent, the role of guardianship, and the validity of marriages entered under unusual circumstances." Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Rhett's presence beside her was solid, steadying. The law exists to protect vulnerable parties from coercion and fraud. Mr. Pemberton has argued passionately that this marriage represents both. However, protection cannot become paternalism. We cannot protect people from their own choices simply because we disapprove of those choices. The judge paused, looking directly at Elena. Mrs. Callahan testified clearly and credibly about her reasons for entering this marriage. While those reasons may be unconventional, they are not invalid. She was not deceived about the nature of the arrangement. She was not promised romance or affection that was then withheld. She was offered a partnership, accepted those terms, and by all evidence has honored them. Elena barely dared to breathe. Furthermore, I find Mr. Thornhill's claim to be acting in Mrs. Callahan's best interest to be undermined by his own testimony and actions. A man who truly cared for her well-being would have respected her decision to leave, not pursued her with armed men. Marcus's face went dark with anger. Therefore, I find no grounds for annulment. The marriage between Rhett Callahan and Elena Callahan is legally valid and shall remain so. Case dismissed. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Elena felt the world tilt. They'd won. Against all odds, against Marcus's lawyers and money and connections, they'd won. Beside her, Rhett let out a breath he'd been holding. His hand found hers under the table, squeezed once, briefly. A moment of connection, acknowledgement of their shared victory. Marcus was already on his feet, his lawyer arguing frantically with the judge about appeals. But Lancaster was done listening. He left the bench, his decision final. Brooks was grinning, shaking their hands, talking about setting precedent and legal implications. People from the gallery approached with congratulations or curiosity. Through it all, Elena kept her eyes on Marcus. He stood frozen at his table, staring at her with an expression of pure fury. All pretense of affection had burned away, leaving only the rage of a man who'd been denied something he'd considered already his. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Elena lifted her chin, refusing to look away. She wasn't his. She'd never been his. And now the law agreed. Marcus turned and left, his lawyer scrambling to follow. Elena watched him go, feeling the weight of 6 years of control and fear lifting from her shoulders. "We should celebrate," Brooks was saying. "There's a decent restaurant near the hotel." "No," Rhett said quietly. "We need to get home. There's work waiting." Brooks looked surprised, then understanding. "Of course. I'll send my final bill to the ranch, and congratulations to you both." They left Cheyenne that afternoon, riding back toward the ranch through clear autumn air. The snow had melted during their absence, leaving the prairie green and renewed. Elena felt lighter than she had in years, as if the judge's ruling had cut invisible chains she'd been dragging. "Thank you," she said as they rode, "for fighting for me. For us." "Don't thank me for doing what needed doing," Rhett said. But there was something in his voice, a warmth that hadn't been there before. They rode in comfortable silence for a while before Elena spoke again. "Rhett, what Marcus said in court about me trading one form of control for another, is that what this feels like to you? Like you're controlling me?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "No, but then I wouldn't be the one to ask, would I? You'd be the only one who could answer that." "It doesn't feel like control," Elena said carefully. "It feels like partnership, like we're building something together instead of one of us imposing on the other." "Good. That's what it should feel like." He glanced at her. "But if that ever changes, if you ever feel trapped or controlled, I need you to tell me, because that's not what I want this to be." It was such a Rhett thing to say, blunt, honest, focused on practical outcomes rather than romantic sentiment. But Elena was learning to read the emotion underneath his directness. He cared about her agency, about her choices being real choices. That mattered more than any pretty words. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of gold and amber. Home. The word rose unbidden in Elena's mind, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a compromise or a refuge. It felt earned. The cattle lowed a greeting as they approached. The chickens scattered in their typical chaotic fashion as Rhett opened the barn doors. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. Solid, real, theirs. That night, after the horses were settled and dinner was eaten and the day's work was finally done, they sat together at the table going over the ranch accounts. It had become a comfortable routine, this end-of-day tallying and planning. "We'll need to think about spring breeding soon," Rhett said, making notes in the ledger. "I want to expand the herd by 20 head if we can manage the feed costs. Can we afford that? Barely. But if we're smart about it, if we time the market right, it could double our profit margin." He showed her the calculations, the careful balancing of risk and reward. Elena studied the numbers, seeing not just figures but possibility. This was their future, laid out in neat columns of income and expense, fragile, uncertain, but theirs to shape. "Let's do it," she said. Rhett looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "It's a risk. Everything worthwhile is." She met his eyes. "We've already gambled on each other. Might as well keep playing." Something shifted in his expression, pride maybe, or respect. "All right then, we expand." They worked until the lamp oil ran low, planning and calculating, building their future one careful decision at a time. And when Elena finally went to bed, she fell asleep thinking not about what she'd escaped, but about what she was building. The legal battle was over. But the real work, the work of turning a desperate bargain into something lasting and strong, was just beginning. And for the first time since her parents died, Elena felt ready for it. Spring arrived with deceptive gentleness. warm winds melting the last patches of snow and coaxing green shoots from the hard earth. Elena stood in the garden plot behind the house, turning soil that had frozen solid just weeks before. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, now bore calluses and small scars from months of ranch work. She'd earned every one of them. "Ground's ready," Rhett said, walking up with a canvas bag of seeds. "We'll plant today, before the weather turns again. Out here, you take the good days when they come." They worked in companionable silence, creating neat rows for vegetables that would sustain them through the next winter. Elena had learned the rhythm of this life, the constant preparation for seasons yet to come, the understanding that today's labor determined tomorrow's survival. The herd expansion they'd committed to in the winter was taking shape. 20 new head of cattle grazed on the spring grass, their presence both promise and pressure. Every additional mouth to feed meant greater risk, but also greater potential profit if they could bring them all healthy to market in the fall. "We'll need to move them to the upper pasture next week," Rhett said over dinner that evening. "Better grazing up there, and it'll give the lower fields time to recover." "How long will we stay with them?" 3, maybe 4 days. There's a line shack up there. Rough, but it keeps the weather out." He paused. "You've never done an overnight drive. It's harder than day work. Long hours in the saddle, sleeping on the ground, and the cattle get restless at night." Elena met his eyes across the table. "I can handle it." "I know you can." There was no question in his voice, just statement of fact. Over the winter months, she'd proven herself a dozen times over. He no longer doubted her capacity for hard work. But 5 days later, as they drove the expanded herd toward the high country, Elena discovered that knowing something intellectually was different from living it physically. The cattle were stubborn and scattered, requiring constant vigilance to keep them moving in the right direction. Her legs ached from hours in the saddle, and the sun beat down with unexpected intensity for spring. By the time they reached the upper pasture, Elena was ready to collapse. But there was still work to be done. Securing the herd, checking for injuries, setting up camp at the line shack. The structure barely deserved the name. 4 walls of weathered timber, a roof that mostly kept rain out, and a stone fireplace that smoked if the wind came from the wrong direction. 2 narrow bunks lined one wall, a rough table, and 2 chairs comprised the only furniture. "Home sweet home," Rhett said dryly, dropping his bedroll on one of the bunks. "I'll get a fire going. You check the water barrel. Should be a stream about 50 yards east." Elena found the stream easily enough, a clear ribbon of snowmelt rushing over smooth stones. She filled the barrel and hauled it back, muscles protesting. By the time she returned, Rhett had a fire crackling and coffee brewing. They ate simple fare, beans and salt pork, hard bread, strong coffee. The meal was consumed mostly in silence, both too tired for conversation. Outside, the cattle settled for the night, their occasional lowing drifting through the thin walls. Elena stretched out on her bunk, every muscle screaming. She'd thought she was in good condition after months of ranch work, but this was a different order of exhaustion entirely. "First overnight is always the worst," Rhett said, reading her expression. "Your body adjusts." "How long did it take you to adjust?" "I'm still adjusting." He poured more coffee. "Every season brings something new to learn. That's part of why I needed a partner. Nobody can know everything alone." It was as close as Rhett came to admitting vulnerability, and Elena recognized it as such. She sat up, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me along, for trusting me with this." "You're my partner. Where else would you be?" He said it matter-of-factly, as if there were no other logical arrangement. That night, sleeping in the narrow bunk with wind whistling through gaps in the timber, Elena found herself thinking about how much had changed since that desperate night she'd arrived at the ranch. She'd been running then, focused only on escape. Now she was building something, investing in a future that stretched beyond mere survival. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. They checked the herd twice daily, moved them to fresh grazing, treated a cow with an infected hoof, and repaired a section of fence that winter had damaged. The work was endless and demanding, but there was satisfaction in it too, the tangible results of effort applied. On the final evening, as they sat by the fire outside the line shack, Rhett spoke suddenly into the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about James lately." Elena waited, knowing that Rhett shared personal thoughts the way other men spent gold, rarely and with purpose. He would have liked you, Rhett continued. He always said I needed someone who wouldn't take my terseness personally, someone practical. He stared into the fire. We built this place from nothing, him and me. Every fence post, every structure. And when he died, I thought about selling it all. Couldn't imagine working it alone. But you didn't sell. No, because walking away would have meant his work counted for nothing. So I stayed, and I kept building, and I told myself I could manage alone. He looked at her then, his gray eyes reflecting firelight. I was wrong. This place needs more than one person's effort to thrive. I see that now. I'm glad you asked me to stay, Elena said quietly, even if it started as a transaction. It's becoming more than a transaction, Rhett said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elena's heart beat faster. They'd been partners for months now, working side by side, sleeping under the same roof, building a future together. But they'd maintained careful boundaries, honoring their original agreement of partnership without romance. Yet something had been shifting between them, slow and inevitable as the changing seasons. The easy comfort they'd developed, the way Rhett's hand would linger on her shoulder when teaching her a new skill, the way Elena found herself watching him work with something more than professional appreciation. Rhett, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. A gunshot cracked through the night, sharp and unmistakable. They were on their feet instantly, Rhett grabbing his rifle from inside the shack. Another shot echoed across the pasture, followed by the panicked lowing of cattle. Stay here, Rhett commanded, already moving toward the sound. Like hell. Elena grabbed the other rifle, the one he'd taught her to shoot, and followed. They ran through the darkness, guided by sounds of chaos from the herd. As they crested a small rise, they saw the scene below. 3 men on horseback were driving a section of the herd away from the main group, using gunshots to scatter and panic the cattle. Rustlers. Rhett didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired a warning shot over the riders' heads. Federal offense to steal cattle. Leave them and ride out. One of the rustlers wheeled his horse around, raising his own weapon. The muzzle flash came before the sound, a bullet whining past too close to Rhett's head. Elena's training took over. She aimed, breathed out, squeezed the trigger gently just as Rhett had taught her. The rustler's horse reared. She deliberately aimed low, going for the animal rather than the rider. The man tumbled from the saddle, cursing. His companions abandoned him immediately, spurring their horses into the darkness. Cowards, then. Only brave when the odds were in their favor. Rhett was already moving toward the fallen rustler, rifle trained on him. Don't move. Elena, check if any cattle are missing. She did a quick count, her heart still hammering from the adrenaline. I think they got 5 or 6 head before we arrived. Damn, Rhett gestured with his rifle at the rustler, who was slowly getting to his feet. Who sent you? Marcus Thornhill? The man spat blood. He'd bitten his tongue in the fall. Don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer. Rhett's voice went cold. You just committed a federal crime on my land, shot at me and my wife, and attempted to steal my property. The sheriff will be very interested in hearing your story, but if you tell me who hired you now, I might not make this as hard on you as I could. The rustler's eyes darted between Rhett and Elena, calculating odds he didn't like. Finally, his shoulders slumped. Some city man. Came through Redemption Creek 2 weeks ago, asking questions about your place. Said he'd pay good money to cause you trouble, make you lose stock. Did this city man have a name? Never gave one, but he had money, real money, the kind that comes from back east. Marcus. It had to be. Apparently losing in court hadn't ended his vendetta. If he couldn't reclaim Elena legally, he'd ruin them financially instead. What was the plan? Rhett demanded. Just steal cattle or something more? The rustler hesitated, then seemed to decide cooperation was his best bet. He wanted us to hit you regular. Every few weeks, take a few head. Nothing big enough to bring federal marshals, but enough to bleed you dry. Said you'd be easier to break if you were desperate. Cold fury settled in Elena's chest. Marcus wasn't just attacking Rhett. He was attacking their livelihood, their future, trying to reduce them to desperation so he could swoop in with another offer, another trap. How many of you? Rhett asked. 6. The 2 who ran, plus 3 more waiting down by Willow Creek. Rhett considered this. Elena, stay with him. Shoot him if he moves wrong. I'm going to round up the scattered cattle and see if I can track the stolen ones. Alone? Against 5 men? They're thieves, not fighters. Soon as they realize their friend got caught and they lost their easy payday, they'll scatter. He met her eyes. Can you handle this? Elena looked at the rustler, who stared back with a mix of resentment and resignation. She raised her rifle, settling into a comfortable stance. Go. Rhett disappeared into the darkness. Elena stood there, weapon trained on the rustler, her mind racing. This was Marcus's doing. Even defeated in court, even legally powerless over her, he was still trying to control her life by destroying what she'd built. Your husband's going to get himself killed, the rustler said. My friends won't run. They'll ambush him. Then they'll die, Elena said flatly. Because Rhett knows this land better than they ever could, and he's a better shot than all of them combined. The rustler laughed bitterly. You're awfully confident for a woman standing alone in the dark. I'm not alone. I'm on my own land with my husband's rifle and nothing left to lose. That makes me considerably more dangerous than you seem to realize. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he fell silent after that. The minutes stretched out. Elena's arms ached from holding the rifle steady, but she didn't lower it. In the distance, she heard occasional sounds, cattle moving, a horse whinnying, once what might have been a shout, then silence. She waited, forcing herself not to imagine the worst. Rhett was capable. He'd survived 4 years alone on this ranch, weathered storms and predators and isolation. A few hired thieves wouldn't be his end. Finally, footsteps approached through the darkness. Elena tensed, finger on the trigger, until Rhett's familiar silhouette emerged into the firelight leading 2 horses. Got the stolen cattle back, he said, breathing hard, and convinced your friends to leave Wyoming permanently. He looked at the rustler. They were very cooperative once I explained that cattle theft is a hanging offense. You killed them? Elena asked. Didn't have to. I just had to be scarier than whoever hired them. Turns out I am. He turned to the rustler. Now you're going to ride into Redemption Creek with us tomorrow, and you're going to tell the sheriff everything you told me. Do that, and I'll speak for leniency. Refuse, and I'll make sure you face the full weight of federal law. The rustler nodded miserably. They tied him securely and took turns watching him through the night. Neither Elena nor Rhett slept much. The attack had shattered the peaceful rhythm of their days in the high pasture, a stark reminder that their legal victory hadn't ended the fight. At dawn, they broke camp and began the drive back to the main ranch with their prisoner in tow. The cattle were skittish after the previous night's chaos, making the work twice as difficult. By the time they reached home, Elena was exhausted and furious in equal measure. I'm riding to Redemption Creek with him, Rhett said as they secured the herd. Sheriff needs to hear this directly. I'm coming with you. Elena, this is my fight too. Marcus is doing this because of me. I'm coming. Rhett studied her face, reading the determination there. Finally, he nodded. Get a fresh horse. We leave in 10 minutes. The ride to town was grim and silent. The rustler, hands bound to his saddle horn, looked increasingly miserable as reality set in. He'd be facing serious charges, possibly years in prison. Sheriff Tom Brennan listened to their story with growing anger. He was a lean man in his 50s, weathered by frontier life, but still sharp-eyed and competent. Federal marshals will want to hear about this, he said after the rustler had given his statement. Organized cattle theft, conspiracy, the whole thing. He looked at Rhett and Elena. You two have made some powerful enemies. We didn't choose this fight, Rhett said. No, but you're in it now. And Marcus Thornhill, if he's really behind this, won't stop just because you caught one group of thieves. Men like that don't accept defeat. Then what do we do? Elena asked. Brennan leaned back in his chair. Document everything. Keep records, witnesses, evidence, and watch your backs. I'll send word to the federal marshals, but they're spread thin. Response time could be weeks. They left the sheriff's office with the weight of that reality pressing down on them. Marcus had resources, connections, and the kind of patient malice that could wait months or years for revenge. The ride home was quiet. Elena watched the landscape pass, seeing it differently now. What had felt like refuge now felt vulnerable. All this open land, impossible to watch all of it at once, A dozen places where enemies could strike unseen. We'll hire help, Rhett said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. One or two men we can trust, extra eyes, extra hands. I've been resisting it because I couldn't afford it, but I can't afford not to anymore. Where will we find trustworthy men? I know a few. Former soldiers mostly. Men who understand loyalty and know how to handle trouble. He paused. It'll eat into our profits. Delay our expansion plans. Better delayed than destroyed. Agreed. That evening, back at the ranch, they sat at the kitchen table and recalculated their finances. The numbers were tighter than Elena had seen them. Hiring help would mean sacrificing their planned growth, possibly for years. We could reduce the herd instead, Elena suggested. Sell off some of the new cattle, use that money for security. That's admitting defeat, letting Marcus dictate our decisions. No, it's being strategic. We can't expand if we're too busy fighting off rustlers. Better to consolidate, protect what we have, and grow when it's safer. Rhett was quiet for a long moment, turning this over. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right. I don't like it, but you're right. He looked at her with something like wonder. When did you get so good at this? I've been watching you all winter, learning how you think, how you plan. She smiled slightly. Turns out I'm decent at strategy when I'm not busy running for my life. He laughed, a rare sound that transformed his usually severe face. James used to say the same thing, that I was so focused on immediate survival I couldn't see the bigger picture. The laughter faded. He was right. I needed a partner who could think past the next crisis. We both bring different things to this partnership, Elena said. That's what makes it work. Rhett's hand moved across the table, covering hers. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. They'd been married for months, partners in every practical sense, but this felt like crossing a threshold into something more intimate. Elena, he said, his voice rougher than usual. About what I said before the rustlers attacked. About this becoming more than a transaction. Her heart hammered. I remember. I meant it. This partnership, this marriage, it's become real for me. Not just legal convenience, but something I value beyond the work. He paused, choosing words carefully. I won't claim to be good at romance or pretty words, but I can offer you honesty. And the truth is, I've come to care about you, about your well-being, your happiness, about building a future together that's more than just survival. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. After everything, the flight from Chicago, the desperate bargain, the months of hard work and gradual trust, here was Rhett offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. Not possession disguised as love, but genuine partnership evolving into genuine affection. I care about you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it would change things between us. It will change things, Rhett said, but maybe that's not bad. Maybe we've built something strong enough to support more weight. He stood, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. For a moment they simply stood there, facing each other across a divide that had seemed unbridgeable just months ago. Then Rhett pulled her close, and Elena went willingly into his arms. The embrace was solid and warm, his heart beating steady against her ear. She felt the strength in his arms, the same strength that had protected her from Marcus's men, that worked this ranch dawn to dusk, that had offered her partnership when she had nothing. But there was gentleness, too, in the way he held her as if she were something precious rather than merely useful. I won't make grand promises, Rhett said into her hair. Can't guarantee we won't face more trouble, or that this life won't be hard. But I can promise I'll stand with you through whatever comes. Partners. Always. Always then, Elena echoed. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight. Two people who'd started as strangers brought together by desperation and built something real through honesty and effort. When they finally pulled apart, Rhett's eyes held a warmth Elena had never seen before. He cupped her face in his calloused hand, thumb brushing her cheek. May I kiss you? He asked, formal even in this. Elena smiled. You're my husband. You don't have to ask. I always want to ask. Want you to always have the choice. It was so perfectly Rhett, even in tenderness, focused on her agency, her consent. Elena stood on her toes and answered by pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, two people learning a new language together. But it deepened quickly, months of restrained tension finally finding release. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should probably discuss the sleeping arrangements," Rhett said, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I don't want to assume—" "Rhett," Elena touched his face. "We've been married for 6 months. I think it's past time we acted like it." Relief and desire warred on his face. "Your room or mine?" "Ours," Elena said firmly. "From now on, it's ours." That night, as they lay together in Rhett's larger bed, Elena felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. The ranch slept around them, the cattle secure in their pasture, the land stretching dark and vast beyond the walls. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably plotting his next move. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to face. But tonight, she was exactly where she wanted to be, in the arms of a man who valued her as a partner first and loved her as a consequence of that respect. Building a life that was hard and uncertain, but honest and hers. The desperate bargain struck on a cold night months ago had become something neither of them had expected, a marriage built on truth that had grown into genuine love. As sleep claimed her, Elena's last conscious thought was that sometimes the best things came from the worst situations, if you were brave enough to fight for them. The next weeks brought changes both welcome and difficult. Rhett hired 2 men, Jack Crawford, a former cavalry sergeant with a weathered face and steady hands, and Thomas Yates, younger but with the sharp eyes of someone who'd learned vigilance the hard way. Both came with solid references and a willingness to work hard. "You understand what you're signing on for?" Rhett asked them on their first day. "This isn't just ranch work. We've got enemies who want to see us fail. Could be dangerous." Jack's scarred face split in a grin. "Son, I've been shot at by Comanche warriors and Confederate sharpshooters. I think I can handle some city boys' hired thugs." Thomas just nodded, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. A man of few words, but his quiet competence spoke volumes. With extra hands, the work became more manageable. Jack and Thomas took turns on watch while Rhett taught them the patterns of the ranch, the places most vulnerable to attack. Elena continued her work, managing the garden, tending the chickens, helping with the cattle when needed, but she also spent time each day practicing with her rifle. Jack, seeing her dedication, offered tips from his military experience. "You're a natural," he said, after watching her hit targets consistently at 75 yards. "Got the temperament for it. Steady hands, patient eye. Most folks get excited and rush the shot. I learned from Rhett. He taught me to treat the rifle like a tool, not a weapon." "Smart man, your husband, though I'd argue anything that can kill is a weapon, regardless of how we think about it." Elena considered this. "Maybe, but thinking of it as a tool helps me stay calm. If I focus on the mechanics instead of the violence, I can do what needs doing without hesitation." "Well," Jack studied her with new respect. "You've seen trouble already, haven't you? Not just threats, but real violence." "The rustlers, and before that, when Marcus's men came." Elena reloaded methodically. "I thought I was prepared, but when the moment came and I had to actually shoot, it was harder than I expected. Always is the first time. But you did it, which is what matters. Next time will be easier." "I hope there won't be a next time." Jack's expression turned grim. "Ma'am, I hope that too. But hope isn't strategy. Better to be ready and not need it than the reverse." 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Rhett received a letter forwarded from the sheriff in Redemption Creek. The handwriting was elegant, the paper expensive. Elena recognized both before he'd even opened the envelope. Marcus. "What does it say?" she asked as Rhett's expression darkened while reading. He handed her the letter wordlessly. Elena scanned the contents, her own anger rising with each line. Marcus was offering to buy the ranch. Not just buy it, he was offering considerably more than fair market value. The letter was polite, even friendly in tone. He acknowledged the court's decision regarding their marriage, claimed to bear no ill will, and suggested that perhaps a financial settlement would be mutually beneficial. Rhett and Elena could sell, take the money, and start fresh somewhere else. Marcus would drop all claims, legal and otherwise. "It's a threat disguised as an offer," Elena said, crumpling the paper. He's saying he'll keep attacking us until we give up and sell to him. That's exactly what he's saying. Rhett's voice was tight with controlled fury. He thinks we'll break eventually, that the pressure will be too much. What do we do? Rhett took the letter back, smoothing it out. We keep it, add it to our documentation, and we write back refusing his offer in terms that leave no room for interpretation. They composed the response together, Elena suggesting diplomatic phrasing, while Rhett insisted on absolute clarity. The final letter was brief and unambiguous. The ranch was not for sale at any price. They intended to remain on their property indefinitely, and any further harassment would be met with full legal consequences. He won't accept this, Elena warned as they sealed the envelope. I know, but we're putting our position on record. When, not if, when, he escalates again, we'll have proof we tried to resolve this peacefully. Jack rode into Redemption Creek to post the letter and returned with troubling news. There was talk in town, questions about Rhett and Elena's marriage, speculation about Elena's past, suggestions that maybe Marcus's concerns had merit. Someone's been spreading stories, Jack reported. Nothing actionable, just whispers. But it's changing how folks see you two, making people doubt. Rhett's jaw tightened. Marcus is poisoning the well, making sure we lose community support before his next move. What can we do? Elena asked. We can't force people to believe us. No, but we can show them who we are through our actions. We keep our word, we deal fairly, we help neighbors when they need it. Truth wins out eventually, if you're patient. But patience was hard when every day brought new small cruelties. Suppliers in town suddenly required cash up front instead of credit. The bank, previously friendly about their account, started asking pointed questions about their financial stability. Social invitations dried up. Ranch families who'd been cautiously welcoming now kept their distance. Elena felt the isolation acutely. She'd been building tentative friendships with other ranch wives, women who understood the challenges of frontier life. Now those connections frayed, undermined by rumor and suspicion. They think I'm some kind of con artist, she told Rhett after a particularly cold reception at the general store. A city girl who trapped you into marriage for your property. Let them think what they want. We know the truth. But it matters what people think. We can't survive completely alone out here. We need the community, the support. We need each other, Rhett interrupted firmly. Everything else is secondary. If the community comes around, good. If not, we manage without them. We've done it before. He was right, but Elena still felt the sting of rejection. She'd finally found a place that felt like home, and now that too was being poisoned by Marcus's machinations. The breaking point came on a warm spring evening. Rhett and Jack were checking the north fence line while Elena and Thomas worked in the barn. The first indication of trouble was smoke galloping into the yard, riderless, reins trailing. Elena's blood went cold. Thomas, get the rifles, something's wrong. They armed themselves and rode north, following the obvious trail of disturbed ground. A mile from the ranch, they found Rhett and Jack pinned down behind an outcropping of rocks, gunfire echoing across the prairie. 4 men on horseback circled the position, taking pot shots. Not rustlers this time. These were professionals, deliberate and methodical in their assault. Elena didn't hesitate. She dismounted, found cover, and opened fire. Her first shot missed, but the second caught one of the attackers in the shoulder. He screamed and wheeled his horse away. Thomas flanked from the other direction, his military training evident in his movements. Caught between 3 firing positions, the attackers suddenly found themselves outgunned. They retreated fast, leaving one of their number wounded and cursing in the dirt. Elena ran to where Rhett crouched behind the rocks. Blood streaked his arm from a graze, but he was moving, talking, alive. You're hurt, she said, hand shaking as adrenaline drained away. Just a scratch. Jack took a bullet in the leg. Needs a doctor. Rhett's eyes met hers, fierce with emotion. You shouldn't have come. Could have been killed. So could you. Elena touched his face, needing the physical confirmation that he was real and whole. We're partners, remember? That means we face danger together. Jack groaned from where Thomas was applying pressure to his leg wound. Touching moment, but could we maybe have it after someone gets me to town? This hurts like hell. They rigged a travois and got Jack back to the ranch, then into Redemption Creek. The doctor confirmed the bullet had gone clean through muscle, painful but not permanently damaging. Jack would recover fully in a few weeks. Sheriff Brennan arrested the wounded attacker, who sang like a bird once he realized his employers had abandoned him. Yes, Marcus Thornhill had hired them. No, it wasn't supposed to be fatal, just enough violence to scare Rhett and Elena into selling. Attempted murder charges, Brennan said grimly. Federal marshals are already on their way. This crossed too many lines. But when the marshals arrived 2 days later and rode to Chicago to arrest Marcus, they found he'd left the country, fled to Europe with most of his liquid assets, beyond the reach of American law. He's gone, the lead marshal reported. Vanished like smoke. Could try extradition, but that's years of legal wrangling with no guarantees. Elena absorbed this numbly. Marcus had escaped justice, but he'd also abandoned his vendetta. He couldn't hurt them from across an ocean. Is it over then? She asked. The marshal hesitated. Probably. But men like Thornhill have long memories and deep pockets. I'd stay vigilant. After the marshals left, Elena and Rhett stood in their yard watching the sun set over land they'd bled to protect. Jack was recovering in the house. Thomas was checking the herd, and for the first time in weeks there was no immediate crisis demanding attention. We survived, Elena said softly. We did more than survive. We won. Rhett pulled her close. Marcus threw everything he had at us, and we're still standing. What if he comes back? Then we'll face it, together. Rhett kissed her temple. But I don't think he will. Men like that only fight battles they think they can win. We proved we're too strong to break. Elena leaned into his strength, letting herself finally believe it might be true. They'd weathered legal attacks, rustlers, assassins, and social isolation. Their partnership had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. I love you, she said, the words still new enough to feel momentous. I love you too. Rhett's voice was rough with emotion. More than I thought I could love anyone. You're not just my wife or my partner, you're my home. Standing there in the fading light, holding each other on land they'd fought to keep, Elena felt a profound sense of arrival. Not at a place, but at a truth. This was where she belonged. Not because fate had led her here, but because she'd chosen it and fought for it and built it with her own hands. The gamble she'd taken that desperate night was paying off in ways she'd never imagined. And whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she knew they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. Summer arrived with a vengeance that year, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the prairie grass and turned the soil to powder. By mid-June, the streams that usually ran clear and cold had dwindled to muddy trickles. The cattle grew restless, wandering farther each day in search of water and decent grazing. Elena stood in what remained of their garden, looking at withered plants that should have been thriving. Despite daily watering from their dwindling well, the vegetables were struggling. The tomato plants drooped, their leaves curling inward. The beans had stopped producing entirely. How bad is it? Rhett asked, coming up behind her with 2 buckets of water from the pump. Bad. We'll lose half the crop if this keeps up. Elena accepted 1 bucket and began carefully watering the most salvageable plants. The well? Holding for now, but the water table's dropping. I've seen droughts before, but this one started early, and it's hitting hard. He emptied his bucket methodically, not wasting a drop. We might need to make difficult choices soon. They'd been making difficult choices since Marcus fled the country. The cost of the attacks, medical bills for Jack, ammunition expended, work time lost to vigilance, had eaten into their savings. They'd recovered, but barely. Now nature itself seemed determined to test them further. That evening, they gathered around the kitchen table with Jack and Thomas to assess their situation. The account ledger lay open, its columns telling a stark story. Feed costs are up because the grazing's poor, Rhett said, running through the numbers. We're going through our hay stores faster than planned. At this rate, we'll run out before fall. Can we buy more? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Not at current prices. Drought's hitting everyone. Hay's become precious as gold. He tapped the ledger. We have 3 options. We can reduce the herd, selling off cattle now before they lose too much weight. We can try to tough it out and hope the drought breaks soon. Or we can move the herd to better grazing, but that means paying for access to someone else's land. What about moving them to the high pasture? Thomas suggested. There was still good grass up there in spring. By now it'll be burned out same as everything else. This drought doesn't care about elevation. Rhett looked at each of them in turn. I'm open to suggestions, but we need to decide soon. Every day we wait, the cattle lose weight and value. Jack, still favoring his injured leg but mostly recovered, spoke up. How many head would you need to sell to get through the summer? 30? Maybe 40? Half the herd. Elena felt her stomach drop. They'd worked so hard to build up their numbers, taking calculated risks to expand. Selling off half would set them back years. What if we sold fewer but took the loss on the remaining cattle? She asked. Keep as many as we can, except that they'll go to market lighter than ideal? We'd make less profit, possibly lose money overall, and we'd still be gambling that we can feed them through the summer. Rhett's expression was grim. There are no good options here, just degrees of bad. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of consequences. This was what frontier life came down to, impossible choices made with incomplete information, where every decision carried the risk of ruin. Elena thought back to the court case, to facing down Marcus's lawyers, to the night she'd shot at rustlers. Those had been clear-cut situations with obvious enemies. This was different. How did you fight the weather? How did you outthink a drought? We reduced the herd, she said finally. Sell 40 head now while they're still in decent condition. Take the money and buy feed for the rest. It's conservative, but it's survivable. Rhett looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. She'd just advocated for cutting their ambitions in half, for accepting setback instead of gambling on recovery. You sure? He asked. I'm sure we can't afford to lose everything chasing growth that might not materialize. Better to take the certain loss now than risk total failure later. Elena met his gaze steadily. You taught me that. Plan for the worst, hope for the best, but never bet more than you can afford to lose. A slow smile crossed Rhett's face, pride evident in his expression. When did you get so smart about risk management? I married a good teacher. The decision made, they moved quickly. Within 2 days, they'd selected the cattle to sell, choosing the animals that would fetch the best prices while keeping their strongest breeding stock. It was brutal calculus, but necessary. The auction in Cheyenne was depressing. Every rancher in the territory had the same idea, flooding the market with cattle. Prices were half what they'd been in the spring. Rhett's jaw tightened as buyer after buyer offered insultingly low bids. We're getting robbed, he muttered to Elena. We're surviving, she corrected. That's what matters. They took the best offer they could get, watching their hard-won herd reduced by nearly half for a fraction of its value. The money they received barely covered the feed costs for the remaining cattle through summer. On the ride home, Rhett was silent, his shoulders tense with suppressed frustration. Elena understood. He'd built this ranch from nothing, survived his partner's death, fought off external enemies. Now the land itself was defeating him in ways violence never could. We'll rebuild, she said as their ranch came into view. With what? We just sold our growth capital for survival money. We're back where I started 5 years ago. No, 5 years ago you were alone. Now you have me, Jack, Thomas. We have infrastructure, experience, relationships. Those aren't nothing. Rhett glanced at her, some of the tension easing from his face. You're right. I'm just used to setbacks being caused by things I can shoot. Can't shoot the weather, but we can outsmart it. How? Elena had been thinking about this during the long ride to Cheyenne and back. We're too dependent on cattle. If the market drops or the weather turns, we have no backup. We need to diversify. Into what? Chickens. More of them. Eggs sell regardless of drought. Maybe sheep. They need less water than cattle. And we could lease some of our land to farmers for a percentage of their crop. Spread the risk across multiple income sources. Rhett considered this, his strategic mind engaging with the problem. Chickens are cheap to expand. Sheep would require new fencing and learning a whole new set of skills. Leasing land means less grazing for our cattle, but it's guaranteed income regardless of weather. Exactly. We become more stable, less vulnerable to any single disaster. You've really thought this through. Someone had to. You were too busy being angry at the sky. He laughed, the sound breaking the tension that had surrounded him since the auction. Fair point. All right, we diversify. Start small, test what works, expand gradually. It's a good plan. They implemented the changes over the following weeks. Elena took charge of expanding the chicken operation, building new coops with Thomas's help, while Rhett and Jack managed the remaining cattle. She proved to have a knack for poultry management, increasing their flock from 20 birds to nearly 100 in a month. The eggs sold well in Redemption Creek, providing steady cash flow that didn't depend on cattle prices or weather. It wasn't glamorous work. Chickens were stupid, messy creatures. But Elena found satisfaction in results that came from consistent effort rather than gambling on markets. They also reached an agreement with a farmer named Samuel Morrison to lease 20 acres for wheat cultivation. Morrison would work the land, and they'd split the harvest 60-40 in his favor. "You're giving up a lot," Morrison said when they finalized the deal. "Most landowners would demand 50-50 or better." "Most landowners aren't in the middle of a drought," Rhett replied. "You're taking the risk of crop failure. Fair to compensate you for that." Word of the deal spread, and their reputation in Redemption Creek began to shift. The whispers that Marcus had spread, about Elena being a con artist, about their marriage being fraudulent, faded as people saw them making honest, community-minded decisions. They weren't carpetbaggers or schemers. They were ranchers doing what ranchers did, adapting to survive. By late July, the drought showed no signs of breaking. The sky remained stubbornly blue day after cloudless day. But the ranch was holding steady. The diversification strategy was working. They weren't thriving, but they weren't failing either. Then one morning, Elena woke feeling distinctly unwell. She made it to the basin just in time to lose her dinner from the night before. Rhett appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "How long have you been sick?" "This is the first time." Elena rinsed her mouth, willing her stomach to settle. "Probably just something I ate." But it happened again the next morning, and the next. By the fourth day, as Elena knelt over the basin with Rhett holding her hair back, they both knew what it meant. "You should see the doctor," Rhett said quietly. "I know what the doctor will say." They rode to Redemption Creek together the following day. Doctor. Peter Marsh was a jovial man in his 60s who'd practiced medicine on the frontier for most of his career. His examination was quick and professional. "Congratulations, Mrs. Callahan. You're about 2 months along, I'd estimate. Baby should arrive sometime in February, assuming all goes well." Elena had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that sent her mind reeling. A baby. A child growing inside her, a life she and Rhett had created together. "Is she healthy?" Rhett asked, his hand finding Elena's. "The baby?" "Everything seems normal so far. Mrs. Callahan is young and strong. She should carry well. Though you'll need to be careful about overexertion as the pregnancy progresses." Dr. Marsh gave Elena a serious look. "I know ranch work is demanding, but you can't push yourself the way you have been. No heavy lifting, no long days in the saddle once you start showing." "I'll make sure she takes care of herself," Rhett said. Elena bristled slightly at being discussed like she wasn't in the room, but the protective concern in Rhett's voice softened her irritation. He was scared. She could see it in the tension around his eyes, the way his hand gripped hers just a bit too tightly. On the ride home, he was quiet, processing. "Are you happy?" Elena asked. "About the baby?" "Happy, terrified, both." Rhett's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Childbirth is dangerous out here. Women die, babies die, and we're in the middle of a drought with limited resources." "Rhett," Elena squeezed his hand, "I'm scared too. But we've faced worse odds before and survived. We'll face this the same way. This is different. Before it was just us. We could take risks because the only lives at stake were our own. But now," he trailed off, emotion thick in his voice. "Now we're going to be parents," Elena finished. "And that's terrifying and wonderful and completely beyond our control. But we'll figure it out, together." He nodded, but the worry didn't leave his face. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Elena still worked, but Rhett and the others insisted on taking over the heavier tasks. She shifted her focus to the chickens and the garden, work that didn't require lifting or long hours in the saddle. It chafed initially. She'd grown to value her competence at ranch work, but she recognized the wisdom in conserving her strength. By August, the drought had become catastrophic. The well ran dry entirely, forcing them to haul water from a creek 2 miles away. The remaining cattle were gaunt despite their careful feeding. Even the chickens seemed listless in the relentless heat. Then, as if nature hadn't inflicted enough hardship, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Elena was in the barn tending the chickens when she heard shouting from the house. She ran outside to find Thomas pointing toward the eastern horizon where a dark smudge was spreading across the sky. Not clouds. Smoke. "Fire!" Thomas yelled. "Big one, moving this way with the wind." Prairie fires were every rancher's nightmare, fast-moving walls of flame that could consume everything in their path. In drought conditions, with everything tinder dry, they were especially deadly. Rhett burst from the house, already assessing the situation. How far? 3 miles, maybe 4, but it's spreading fast. Rhett's face went hard, slipping into the decisive mode Elena recognized from crises. "Thomas, ride to Morrison's farm. Warn them and anyone else you pass. Jack, start moving the cattle toward the creek. Elena, gather everything essential, documents, money, anything we can't replace. We might have to abandon the ranch." "No." The word came out before Elena had consciously decided to say it. "We don't abandon, we fight." "Elena, a prairie fire can be stopped with a fire break. I've read about it. If we burn a strip of land between here and the fire, create a barrier of already burned ground, the main fire has nothing to feed on when it reaches us." Rhett stared at her. "That's dangerous as hell. If we lose control of our burn, we could destroy the ranch ourselves. And if we run, we definitely lose everything." Elena met his eyes, steady and certain. "We fight. That's what we do." For a moment she thought he'd override her, insist on evacuation for her safety and the babies, but then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, respect, trust. "All right. We fight." He turned to Jack. "Get every tool we have for cutting fire breaks. Shovels, rakes, anything. I'll saddle the horses. Elena, you're not on the fire line. You coordinate from the house, keep water ready, watch for spot fires." "Rhett, that's the deal. We fight, but you stay safe, non-negotiable." Elena wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This was him protecting not just her, but their unborn child. She could respect that. They worked with desperate speed. Rhett and Jack rode out to a point 200 yards from the ranch buildings and began cutting a fire break, clearing vegetation in a line perpendicular to the fire's approach. Once they had a bare strip of earth, they set controlled fires to burn back toward the approaching inferno, creating a zone of scorched ground. Elena watched from the house, keeping kettles of water boiling, ready to douse any sparks that might leap the break. Thomas returned with Morrison and 3 of his field hands, all pitching in to extend the fire break. The main fire roared closer, a wall of orange and black that turned day into hellish twilight. The heat was oppressive even at a distance, the air thick with smoke. Elena could see Rhett and the others as silhouettes against the flames, working frantically to expand their defensive burn. It was going to be close, terrifyingly close. The fires met with a sound like thunder, flames leaping high where the approaching inferno hit the fire break. For a long, agonizing moment, Elena thought their gamble had failed, that the fire would simply jump the break and consume everything. But the backburn had done its job. With nothing left to feed on, the main fire stuttered and began to die at the break line. Spot fires ignited where embers landed, but Elena and the others doused them quickly with buckets of precious water. After an hour that felt like an eternity, the danger passed. The fire continued burning to the north and south, but it flowed around their property like water around a stone. The ranch was scarred and smoke-damaged, but standing. Rhett stumbled back to the house, his face black with soot, clothes singed in places. Elena ran to him, throwing her arms around him despite the ash and smell of smoke. "We did it," she said into his chest. "We actually did it. You did it." Rhett's voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation. "Your idea saved us. If we'd run, we'd have lost everything." Morrison and his men stayed to help check for lingering hotspots. As they worked into the evening, the farmer approached Rhett and Elena. "That was the gutsiest thing I've seen in 20 years on the frontier," Morrison said. "Standing your ground against a fire like that, most folks would have run." "Most folks would have been smarter," Rhett said. "Maybe. But you saved your land, and the fire break you cut probably saved my farm too. The fire would have hit us full force if you hadn't slowed it down. Morrison extended his hand. I owe you. If you ever need help, you call on me. After everyone left, Elena and Rhett surveyed the damage by lamplight. The garden was destroyed entirely, burned to ash. Part of the northern pasture was scorched black. One of the smaller outbuildings had caught fire and burned to its foundation. But the house stood. The barn stood. The cattle had survived, driven to safety by Jack. The core of their ranch remained intact. We can rebuild what we lost, Elena said, standing in the ruins of her garden. The buildings, the fences. It'll take time, but it's possible. At what cost? Rhett's voice was flat with exhaustion. The drought, the depleted herd, now this. How much more can we take? Elena turned to face him, seeing the weight of accumulated crises in every line of his face. He'd been strong through everything, Marcus's attacks, the financial struggles, the drought. But everyone had a breaking point. As much as we have to, she said firmly, because giving up isn't an option. Not for me, not for you, and not for this child. She placed his hand on her stomach, which was just beginning to show the curve of pregnancy. We're building something here, Rhett. Not just a ranch, but a legacy. Our child will grow up knowing their parents fought for every inch of this land and never surrendered. His hand splayed across her stomach, and for a moment his expression crumbled. I'm so tired, Elena. Tired of fighting, tired of barely surviving. I wanted to give you more than this. Give our child more than constant struggle. You've given me everything that matters. Partnership, love, the freedom to choose my own path. Elena covered his hand with hers. The struggle is temporary. The foundation we're building is permanent. You believe that? I have to, and so do you. Rhett pulled her close, careful of her growing belly, and held her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with uncertainty. They stood there in the ash-covered yard, two people who'd started as desperate strangers and become something unbreakable through trial after trial. We'll make it, Rhett said finally, the words both promise and prayer. Somehow, we'll make it. The next weeks were a blur of recovery. They buried themselves in work, rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. The community, seeing how they'd stood their ground and saved not just their own land, but prevented the fire from spreading further, rallied around them. Neighbors who'd been distant after Marcus's Whisper campaign now showed up with surplus timber, offers of labor, casseroles for dinner. The drought finally broke in mid-September with a storm so violent it felt like nature apologizing for months of absence. Rain fell for 3 days straight, turning dust into mud and filling the dry creek beds to overflowing. The well refilled. The prairie turned green almost overnight. By October, when the first cool winds of autumn arrived, the ranch had transformed. They'd rebuilt the burned structures better than before. Morrison's wheat crop came in strong, and their share of the harvest added substantially to their depleted savings. The cattle, having survived the summer, were fattening on the renewed grass. Elena's pregnancy progressed without complication. By the time the first snow fell, she was 6 months along and moving with the careful waddle of a woman carrying precious cargo. Rhett had become almost comically protective, insisting she avoid any task more strenuous than feeding chickens. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she protested when he carried a basket of eggs she could have managed herself. Humor me, he said. I've already nearly lost you to Marcus's men, rustlers, and a prairie fire. I'm not taking chances now. On a cold November evening, they sat by the fire going over the ranch accounts. Despite everything, the drought, the fire, the reduced herd, they'd not only survived but showed a modest profit for the year. We did it, Elena said, studying the final numbers. Against every odd, we actually came out ahead. Barely, but yes. Rhett closed the ledger. And more importantly, we're positioned for better growth next year. The diversification strategy worked. We're not dependent on any single income source anymore. What do you want to do with the profit? Expand the herd again? Rhett was quiet for a moment, firelight playing across his face. I want to put it toward building a larger house, one with a proper nursery for the baby, maybe a second bedroom for when other children come. Elena's breath caught. They'd been so focused on immediate survival that talk of future children felt almost extravagant. Other children? You want more than one? If you do, if we can afford it. He met her eyes. I spent so long alone, convinced that was my fate. Then you arrived and changed everything. Now I can't imagine going back to that isolation. I want a house full of noise and chaos and life. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, the emotion of pregnancy making them spill over. I want that too. I want our children to grow up knowing they're loved and chosen, not obligated. They will be. Rhett moved to sit beside her, pulling her close. Every single one will know they're wanted. The baby kicked then, a strong thump against Elena's ribs. Rhett's eyes widened in wonder, his hand moving to the spot. Was that your child saying hello? Elena laughed at his expression of awe. Getting stronger every day. Takes after you, stubborn and active. Takes after you, resilient and impossible to ignore. He kept his hand on her stomach, feeling for more movement. Have you thought about names? They discussed possibilities late into the night, debating the merits of traditional versus unusual, family names versus starting fresh. Eventually, they settled on a short list for both boy and girl possibilities, agreeing to wait until the baby arrived to make the final decision. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and quiet, Elena found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she'd been running for her life, desperate and alone. Now she had a home, a husband who loved her, a child on the way, and a future that was hers to shape. The gamble she'd taken that cold night, saying yes to a stranger's blunt proposal, had become the best decision of her life. Not because it was easy or comfortable, but because it was real. Built on honesty, tested by hardship, strengthened through partnership. Standing at the window watching snow fall across land they'd fought to keep, Elena placed a hand on her swelling stomach and made a silent promise to the child growing there. This ranch, this life, this legacy, it would be theirs, built not on inheritance or entitlement, but on courage, work, and the absolute certainty that anything worth having was worth fighting for. The fire, the drought, Marcus's attacks, all of it had been preparation for this moment, for understanding that security wasn't given, it was earned, that love grew not from comfort, but from choosing someone through every trial. Rhett joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind, careful of the baby between them. They stood there together, watching winter claim the land they'd saved, knowing that spring would come again, knowing that whatever challenges it brought, they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. Always together. And that was more than enough. February arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow that turned the ranch into a frozen landscape of white and gray. Elena's pregnancy had reached its final weeks, her body heavy and ungainly, every movement requiring deliberate effort. She'd stopped most ranch work entirely, relegated to indoor tasks that frustrated her independent spirit, but which she accepted as necessary. Rhett had become almost obsessive in his preparations. The new nursery was finished, complete with a handmade cradle he'd spent weeks crafting in secret. Dr. Marsh had agreed to stay at the ranch for the final 2 weeks of Elena's pregnancy, a luxury they could barely afford, but which Rhett insisted was non-negotiable. I've delivered plenty of babies, Dr. Marsh assured them on his arrival. Farm children, ranch children, even a few born in wagons during migration. Nature knows what it's doing most of the time. And when it doesn't? Rhett asked, his voice tight. Then I'm here to help it along. The doctor's tone was kind but firm. Mrs. Callahan is healthy and strong. No reason to expect complications. But your worry is normal. Every expectant father feels it. Elena watched Rhett's face, seeing the fear he tried to hide. He'd lost his parents, lost his partner James, had seen death visit the frontier too many times to have easy confidence in happy outcomes. She took his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm tougher than I look, she said. You know that. I do. Doesn't stop me from worrying. The labor began 3 days later, in the dead of night during a howling blizzard. Elena woke to cramping pain that started low and radiated outward, stealing her breath. She lay still for a moment, timing the contractions as Dr. Marsh had instructed, confirming what her body already knew. Rhett, she said, shaking his shoulder. It's time. He was awake instantly, moving with the focused efficiency of a man who'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. He lit the lamps, stoked the fire to blazing, woke Dr. Marsh, and sent Jack riding through the storm to fetch the midwife from Redemption Creek as backup. The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and effort. Dr. Marsh was calm and reassuring, guiding Elena through the stages of labor with practiced competence. Rhett stayed by her side, holding her hand, offering water, speaking low words of encouragement that she barely heard through the waves of contraction. "You're doing wonderfully," Dr. Marsh said during a brief respite. "The baby's positioned well. Everything is progressing normally." But as dawn broke gray and cold outside, the labor intensified to something beyond normal pain. Elena felt her body being torn apart from the inside, every contraction of violence that left her gasping and shaking. "Something's wrong," she managed between clenched teeth. Dr. Marsh examined her quickly, his expression growing serious. "The baby's shoulder is catching. Not uncommon, but we need to work together to move things along. Mrs. Callahan, when the next contraction comes, I need you to push with everything you have." The midwife arrived then, snow-covered and breathing hard from her rush through the storm. She took one look at the situation and moved immediately to help, adding her experience to Dr. Marsh's expertise. "I can't," Elena sobbed, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever known. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." Rhett's voice cut through her despair, steady and certain. "You've survived everything else. You can survive this. I believe in you." She met his eyes, seeing absolute faith there. He'd watched her shoot rustlers, fight fires, rebuild from disasters. If he believed she could do this, maybe she could. When the next contraction hit, Elena bore down with every ounce of strength remaining in her body. The pain was transcendent, beyond description, a white-hot agony that seemed to split her apart. And then, suddenly, release. The pressure vanished, replaced by a different sound, a baby's angry wail. "It's a girl," Dr. Marsh announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant, "and she's got a good set of lungs on her." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Through the exhaustion and relief, she heard her daughter crying, asserting her presence in the world with furious determination. "Can I hold her?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. The midwife cleaned the baby quickly and placed her in Elena's arms. The infant was tiny, impossibly fragile-looking, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the lamps. But her grip was strong when Elena offered a finger, and her cries were robust. "She's perfect," Elena whispered. Rhett stared at his daughter with an expression of wonder so profound it transformed his usually stoic face. "She really is." He touched the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger, and she immediately gripped it. "Strong, too, like her mother." "What will you name her?" Dr. Marsh asked as he finished his work. Elena and Rhett had debated names for weeks, but suddenly the answer was obvious. "Catherine," Elena said. "After my mother, Catherine Ann Callahan." "Catherine," Rhett repeated, testing the name. "Katie for short?" "When she's older, maybe. Right now she's too serious for a nickname." Elena smiled at her daughter, who'd stopped crying and was making small, snuffling sounds. "She already looks like she's assessing the situation, deciding if this world meets her standards." "Takes after you in that too, then." Rhett leaned down and kissed Elena's forehead. "Thank you. For her. For everything." Over the next days, Elena recovered while learning the exhausting reality of new motherhood. Catherine demanded feeding every few hours, slept in unpredictable bursts, and required constant attention. Rhett proved surprisingly competent with the baby, pacing the floor at night when she fussed, changing diapers without complaint, singing awkward lullabies in his rough voice. "Where did you learn to do this?" Elena asked one night, watching him settle Catherine back to sleep with practiced ease. "Helped James with his sister's kids a few times when they visited. Figured babies were like cattle. They need feeding, cleaning, and comfort, just smaller and louder." He placed Catherine gently in her cradle. "Though I'll admit, caring about this one is different. She's ours." The word settled warm in Elena's chest. Ours. Not just hers or his, but theirs. The first generation of a family they were building together. By March, Catherine had settled into something resembling a routine, and Elena was recovering her strength. The ranch work continued around them, Jack and Thomas handling the daily tasks while Rhett balanced between helping them and spending time with his new daughter. It was during one of Catherine's afternoon naps that the letter arrived. Jack brought it from town, his expression troubled. "Legal document," he said, handing it to Rhett. "From Chicago." Elena's blood went cold. Marcus. It had to be. Somehow, he'd found a way to reach them even from Europe. But when Rhett opened the envelope, confusion crossed his face. "It's not from Marcus. It's from your guardian's estate attorneys." "My guardian?" Elena took the letter, scanning its contents. Her guardian had died 3 months prior, natural causes, a heart attack in his sleep. The letter detailed the disposition of his estate, including the trust fund he'd controlled on Elena's behalf. "I don't understand," Elena said. "Why are they contacting me now?" Rhett read over her shoulder, his expression sharpening as he reached the relevant section. "Because your marriage dissolved his authority over your inheritance. The trust reverted to you automatically. They've been trying to reach you for months to arrange transfer of the funds." Elena stared at the number written in precise legal script. It was substantial, far more than she'd realized her parents had left. More than enough to not just stabilize the ranch, but expand it significantly, buy better breeding stock, invest in improvements they'd only dreamed of. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Does it?" Rhett's voice was careful, neutral. "It's your money, Elena. From your family. You could take it and leave, start fresh somewhere else, somewhere easier than a Wyoming ranch." She looked at him, seeing the fear he was trying to hide behind practicality. He was giving her an out, offering her the freedom to choose a different path now that she had resources. It was so typically Rhett, honest to a fault, even when that honesty might cost him everything. "You're right," Elena said slowly. "This money is mine, which means I get to decide what to do with it." "And what do you want to do?" Elena looked around the ranch house, the home they'd defended from fire and enemies, the cradle where their daughter slept, the account ledger showing their hard-won survival. She thought about everything they'd built together, every trial they'd weathered, every choice that had brought them to this moment. "I want to invest it in the ranch, in our future, buy the breeding stock we've been putting off, expand the irrigation system so we're not vulnerable to drought, maybe buy the adjacent property that came up for sale last month." She met Rhett's eyes. "This is my home. You're my family. Why would I want to be anywhere else?" The relief that flooded his face was profound. "You're sure? You could have a much easier life." "I don't want easier. I want this. I want us." Elena took his hand. "Besides, Catherine deserves to inherit something more than just money. She deserves to inherit a legacy her parents built together, something worth fighting for." Rhett pulled her close, and for a moment they simply held each other, feeling the weight of what this meant. The desperate gamble that had brought them together had evolved into something neither could have imagined, a partnership built on truth that had survived every test and emerged stronger. But their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. Rhett tensed, moving immediately to the window. Elena joined him, her heart sinking at what she saw. 6 riders, well-dressed and purposeful, approaching the ranch in formation. Leading them was a man in an expensive suit, his face unfamiliar but his bearing unmistakably authoritative. "More trouble," Rhett said grimly, already reaching for his rifle. "Wait." Elena studied the riders more carefully. "They're not moving like an attack. See how they're staying grouped, riding openly? If they meant violence, they'd spread out, approach from cover." She was right. The riders stopped in the yard, the lead man dismounting with the careful movements of someone aware they were entering potentially hostile territory. He removed his hat and called out, "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan, my name is Harrison Wells. I'm an attorney from Chicago. I'd like to speak with you about a legal matter, if I may." Rhett opened the door but kept his rifle visible. "Speak then." Wells glanced at the weapon, unfazed. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside. What I have to say concerns Marcus Thornhill and matters that might be sensitive." Elena and Rhett exchanged glances. Finally, Rhett nodded. Jack, Thomas, keep an eye on his men. Any trouble, you know what to do. Inside, Wells settled into a chair while Elena checked on Catherine, who'd somehow slept through the commotion. When they were all seated, Wells pulled a thick folder from his case. I represent a consortium of Marcus Thornhill's former business associates, he began. Men who invested heavily in ventures that Mr. Thornhill was managing. When he fled to Europe, he took substantial funds that weren't entirely his own. What does this have to do with us? Elena asked. Everything, as it turns out. In investigating Mr. Thornhill's financial affairs, we discovered extensive documentation of his vendetta against you both. The hired rustlers, the assassins, the legal attacks, all of it carefully recorded in his personal ledgers. He was, unfortunately for him, meticulous about keeping receipts. Wells opened the folder revealing page after page of documented crimes. Payments to criminals, correspondence outlining plans to destroy the ranch, even drafts of false legal documents meant to invalidate Elena and Rhett's marriage. Why are you showing us this? Rhett asked. Because my clients want justice. Mr. Thornhill's theft has ruined several of them financially. They're pursuing criminal charges and civil remedies, but European extradition is complicated. Wells leaned forward. However, we've discovered that Mr. Thornhill purchased significant property in the Wyoming territory under various shell companies. Land, mining rights, water access, assets worth considerable money. And you want our help seizing them? Elena guessed. We want your testimony. With your statements about the attacks he ordered, combined with this documentary evidence, we can freeze his American assets and eventually force their liquidation to compensate his victims. Wells paused. There's another consideration. Some of the property he acquired was obtained through fraudulent means, claims jumping, forged deeds, intimidation. You were victims of his criminal enterprise. Under territorial law, you'd be entitled to compensation from the proceeds of asset seizure. Rhett's eyes narrowed. How much compensation? Potentially substantial. The assets total over $200,000. If even a portion was obtained illegally, and your testimony helps secure conviction, you could be looking at a significant settlement. Elena felt her head spin. First the inheritance, now this. Suddenly, they weren't struggling ranchers barely surviving. They were potentially wealthy. What exactly would we need to do? She asked. Provide sworn testimony about the attacks. Allow us to use your legal case as evidence of his pattern of criminal behavior. Possibly testify at trial, though we'd try to avoid that necessity given your circumstances. Wells glanced at the cradle where Catherine slept. I understand you have a young child. We'd minimize disruption to your lives. And if we refuse, Rhett asked. Then you refuse. We have other evidence, other witnesses. But your case is the most dramatic, the most clearly criminal. It would strengthen our position considerably. Elena and Rhett looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that married partners develop. She could see him weighing the risks and benefits, the potential for this to drag them back into legal entanglements versus the chance to finally, definitively end Marcus's ability to harm them. We'll do it, Elena said. On one condition. Name it. Any property seizures that involve land adjacent to our ranch, we get first option to purchase at fair market value before it goes to public auction. Wells smiled. That seems reasonable. I'll include it in the agreement. They spent the next hours providing detailed statements about everything Marcus had done. The attempted forced marriage, the rustlers, the assassins, the prairie fire they suspected he'd somehow arranged. Wells's clerk documented everything meticulously, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, Wells packed up his documents with evident satisfaction. This is excellent, more than I'd hoped for. Mr. Thornhill chose his targets poorly when he came after you two. He underestimated us, Rhett said simply. Clearly. I'll be in touch as the case proceeds. In the meantime, enjoy your ranch, your family, and the knowledge that your persecutor is about to face consequences for his actions. After Wells and his men departed, Elena and Rhett sat in stunned silence. The baby woke and needed feeding, grounding them back in immediate reality. But as Elena nursed Catherine, watching Rhett stoke the fire, she felt the pieces of their lives clicking into place with almost audible certainty. We won, she said softly. Really won. Not just survived, but won. Seems like it. Rhett joined her on the sofa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Strange feeling, isn't it? After so long fighting just to keep our heads above water, suddenly we're looking at actual prosperity. What do you want to do with it? The money, the opportunity, all of it. Rhett considered, watching their daughter nurse with single-minded focus. I want to build something that lasts, not just for us, but for Catherine and whatever other children we have. A ranch that's prosperous enough to support multiple families, provide good jobs for people like Jack and Thomas. Something that contributes to the community instead of just taking from it. That sounds perfect, Elena said, and maybe we could help other women in situations like mine was. Women running from forced marriages or bad guardians. We could offer them legitimate work, fair treatment, give them the same chance you gave me. A refuge that's also a working ranch. I like it. Rhett kissed her temple. You've got a good heart, Elena Callahan. I learned from a good teacher. Over the following months, they implemented their vision with careful deliberation. The inheritance money allowed them to expand the herd significantly, buying quality breeding stock that would improve their cattle for generations. They installed a proper irrigation system that drew from the creek, ensuring they'd never again be entirely vulnerable to drought. The settlement from Marcus's seized assets came through in late summer, a substantial sum that made even the inheritance look modest. With it, they purchased 2 adjacent properties, tripling their land holdings and securing water rights that had been contentious for years. But perhaps most importantly, they hired their first refugee. Sarah Mitchell arrived in August, fleeing an arranged marriage to a violent man in St. Louis. She was skittish and scared, but determined. Elena saw herself in Sarah's eyes, the same desperate hope, the same willingness to work for freedom. They gave her a job managing the expanded chicken operation, fair wages, and a safe place to sleep. Within a month, Sarah was thriving, her natural aptitude for organization transforming their poultry business into a remarkably efficient operation. You were right, Rhett told Elena as they watched Sarah confidently direct 2 new workers in processing eggs for market, about helping others like you. It's good for them, but it's good for us too. She's better at this than either of us ever were. Everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path, Elena said. We're just providing the opportunity. By autumn, when Catherine was 9 months old and learning to crawl with determined intensity, the ranch had transformed. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. New bunkhouses housed workers, not just temporary hired hands, but permanent employees who took pride in the operation. The cattle herd numbered over 200 head, healthy and thriving. They diversified further, too, adding sheep as Elena had suggested months ago, and leasing portions of their expanded land to farmers on favorable terms. Multiple income streams, none dependent on any single factor. They'd built resilience into every aspect of the operation. The community's perception of them had shifted as well. Rhett and Elena Callahan weren't strange outsiders anymore, but respected members of the Redemption Creek area. When the town needed funds to build a proper schoolhouse, they were among the largest donors. When a neighboring ranch faced foreclosure after bad luck and worse weather, they bought the property at fair value and hired the family to continue working it as managers. You're becoming pillars of the community, Samuel Morrison said one evening over dinner at their house. Who would have thought the solitary Rhett Callahan would end up being the most community-minded rancher in the territory? I had help, Rhett said, smiling at Elena. Turns out I was just waiting for the right partner to show me what was possible. But their peace was broken one October morning when Sheriff Brennan rode up with news that made Elena's blood run cold. Marcus Thornhill is dead, he announced without preamble. Killed in a duel in Paris 3 days ago. French authorities confirmed it. Elena sat down heavily, processing this. Marcus, the man who'd hunted her, tried to destroy her life, nearly killed Rhett, was simply gone. No more threat, no more fear, just finished. What happened? Rhett asked. Near as the authorities can tell, he challenged some French noblemen over a gambling debt. He was apparently destitute, had burned through his stolen money, and was living on credit and charm. The duel was his way of trying to restore his honor. Brennan shrugged. He lost. Good riddance, Jack muttered from where he was repairing tack. Elena surprised herself by feeling nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even pity. Marcus had become irrelevant to her life months ago. The news of his death just confirmed what was already true. He had no power over her anymore. "Thank you for letting us know, Sheriff," she said. After Brennan left, Rhett found Elena in the nursery, watching Catherine play with wooden blocks he'd carved for her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Free," Elena said simply. "I thought I already was, but knowing he's actually gone, it's like the last shadow finally lifted. He can't hurt us, can't threaten Catherine, can't touch anything we've built." "No, he can't." Rhett pulled her close. "It's really over, all of it." And it was. The vendetta that had started with a desperate flight from Chicago had ended with Marcus's death in a foreign country, broken by his own choices. Elena had survived not just him, but everything he'd thrown at her. She'd turned his worst effort into her greatest victory. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their careful planning. The ranch prospered, growing from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the territory. Rhett's reputation as a fair but shrewd businessman spread, bringing opportunities and partnerships. They had 2 more children, a son named James after Rhett's late partner, and another daughter they called Annie. The house rang with noise and chaos and love, exactly as Rhett had envisioned that night when he dreamed of a family. Catherine grew into a fierce, intelligent girl who could ride before she could read and showed every sign of inheriting both her parents' stubbornness. James was quieter, thoughtful, with his father's gift for strategic thinking. Annie was still a baby, but already showed signs of remarkable determination. On Catherine's 5th birthday, they threw a party that drew families from across 3 counties. The ranch had become a gathering place, a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. As Elena watched her children play with neighbors' kids, watched Rhett orchestrate games with surprising enthusiasm, watched Jack and Thomas trade jokes with other ranch hands, she felt a profound sense of completion. This life, messy and chaotic, demanding and unpredictable, was everything she'd never known she wanted. She'd fled one future and stumbled into another, turning a desperate bargain into something magnificent through nothing more than hard work, honesty, and the willingness to fight for what mattered. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Elena and Rhett sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful, full of possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Rhett asked suddenly. "Saying yes that night, choosing this life instead of running further?" Elena considered the question seriously. She thought about the exhaustion and fear of those early days, the violence and struggle, the moments when failure seemed inevitable. She thought about all the easier paths she could have chosen, the softer lives she could have led. "Not for a second," she said finally. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be, with you, with our children, building something that matters. Even though it started as a transaction, especially because it started as a transaction, no false promises, no illusions, just honest need meeting honest opportunity. Everything we built came from that foundation of truth." Rhett was quiet for a moment, then pulled something from his pocket, a small box wrapped in cloth. "I got you something for the anniversary." Elena opened it to find a simple gold ring engraved with their names and the date of their marriage. It was beautiful in its simplicity, practical but meaningful. "We never did proper wedding rings," Rhett said. "Too expensive when we married. But now—" He took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "Now I want you to have something that shows the world what you mean to me. Not just my partner or the mother of my children, my wife. The woman I chose and who chose me back." Elena felt tears spill over, looking at the ring gleaming in the lamplight. "It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm really not. But I try to be worthy of you. You've been worthy from the beginning. You offered me a choice when everyone else wanted to take my choices away. You treated me like an equal when the world said I was property. You built a life with me instead of for me." Elena kissed him, tasting salt from her tears. "That's worth more than any romance novel promises." They sat there long into the night, talking about plans for the next expansion, discussing which college they hoped Catherine might attend someday, debating whether to buy the Morrison farm when Samuel finally retired. Practical conversations about a shared future they'd earned the right to plan. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The cattle lowed softly in their sleep. Wind moved through the prairie grass with a sound like whispered promises. The ranch slept around them, solid and real, built on bedrock instead of sand. Elena looked at the home they'd created, not just the buildings and land, but the life itself. A refuge for the desperate, a training ground for the determined, a proving ground for courage. Their legacy wasn't just property or wealth. It was the example they'd set, the people they'd helped, the proof that honesty and partnership could overcome any obstacle. She thought about the girl she'd been, fleeing Chicago in a stolen dress on a dying horse, and barely recognized her. That girl had been running from a forced future. The woman she'd become had created her own future, on her own terms, through her own strength. The desperate bargain struck on a cold Wyoming night had become the foundation of a dynasty, not built on inheritance or entitlement, but on the simple, revolutionary idea that two people committed to honesty and partnership could weather any storm and build something that would last generations. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Elena and Rhett sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd started as strangers and become something unbreakable. They'd gambled everything on each other and won not just survival, but prosperity, not just partnership, but love, not just a life, but a legacy. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The desperate girl who'd knocked on a stranger's door seeking refuge had found more than safety. She'd found home. She'd found purpose. She'd found herself. And she'd found that sometimes the best things in life came not from careful planning or good fortune, but from being brave enough to say yes when presented with an impossible choice. The ranch would stand for generations, a testament to the power of partnership. And long after Elena and Rhett were gone, their descendants would tell the story of how it all began, with a desperate woman, a solitary man, and a blunt proposal that changed everything. A bargain struck in darkness that became a legacy forged in light.